Now dig on this podcast.
Starting the podcast.
Now dig on this podcast. Welcome to Franchise Flicks. My name is Ted, and joining me are my co-hosts Andy and Zach. On this podcast, we task ourselves with watching movie franchises, breaking them down, and reviewing them, including franchises we've seen and love, as well as franchises we've never seen and frankly avoided. Today we're talking about the Sam Raimi Spider Man series, the first comic book franchise to answer the question, is there such thing as too many villains? The series includes Spider-Man's 1, 2, and 3. So, on this podcast, we usually like to start things off with talking about our experience level with this franchise. And especially with this franchise, because there's so many movies, there's so much media, I don't want to just talk about experience level with just this particular series. I want to maybe talk about experience level with Spider-Man comics, animation, whatever it might be, any Spider-Man that you ingest. So, Andy, why don't you take it away with your experience?
So first with the movies, I'll start there. I definitely saw one when it came out. Don't know if it was in theaters or on TV after the fact, but I remember watching and thinking, cool, like Spider-Man is a movie, which will tie into the other familiarity, what I had growing up with Spider-Man. I'll get to that in just a moment. But I don't think I ever saw 2 all the way through, or it's in its entirety, like sitting down to watch the movie. It might have been like something where it was on and kind of watched it. The third one, this was my first time watching it, had never seen it before, hadn't even really heard anything of it before, maybe some vague memories of the trailer, seeing it while watching something else, but didn't have the pleasure of enjoying it until this time around. Now, with Spider-Man is like a entire franchise. I used to watch the cartoons. I think it was like on Saturday morning cartoons on Fox. That was where I would watch it. And then the like Amazing Spider-Man would play on maybe it was Cartoon Network, or I don't remember which station it was, but I would occasionally watch like those older Spider-Man shows as well. But yeah, so didn't really care for it too much like other types of Marvel superheroes. It was like them, or rather Spider-Man, X-Men, anything that played on Fox I was familiar with, but everything else was DC for me. So like Spider-Man, it's cool to see where this franchise was going to go in the end. Can't wait to talk about it. What about you, Zach? What's your familiarity?
Spider-Man is one of my, if not my favorite superhero ever. Even as a kid, I grew up, doing the same thing, watching the Spider-Man, the 90s animation on like WB or whatever they were showing it on back then. I feel like WB had all those superhero shows. I know they had Yu-Gi-Oh. I was a big Yu-Gi-Oh guy too.
Yeah, me too.
So I think that's where it was. But regard, like that's where I watched. In fact, I still watch that show today with my 3-year-old because he, like me, is a big Spidey fan, and so we watch that. We watch Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which has Iceman and Starlight from like the early 70s. It's the best. It's the worst best show. If you don't know who Video Man is, you need to watch Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends because it is a real treasure. But like I love Spider-Man, so I try to watch like everything Spider-Man. So my dad is a big Spider-Man fan too, so I saw all of these movies in the theater, including the first one. These are very nostalgic to me, even though I was I think 11 when the first one came out, so it was like perfect like superhero time, and I was always a big Spider-Man fan. So these movies are really kind of like some of the earliest stuff I remember about being like a superhero fan, were these movies. So I loved that we got to rewatch these. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Ted?
Yeah, I'm pretty much right there with you guys, somewhere in between. I don't remember specifics, but I definitely watched the animated series growing up, along with the other Marvel animated series. I mean, that was the heyday of comic book animated series, and Spider-Man was just one of the many great ones at the time. Specifically with this series, I remember being very excited about it just because Spider-Man was one of my favorites as well. Definitely the one that like you gravitate to as a kid as well, because his character, he's a high school student, he's kind of an outcast, and he's dealing with all these things that kids deal with growing up, but also at the same time, he's a superhero. And that's like the first time you can really relate to a superhero beyond like, that's really cool, I want to be that. It's like, wow, this guy's doing it all. He's going to school, he's got the hot girlfriend, or at least trying to at the time, and he's juggling all that with being a superhero. That's really awesome. But yeah, these movies specifically, I remember them. I don't think I ever saw them in theaters, but I remember seeing them on like TBS, I think, a lot of times. This was like the start of FX and TBS playing all of these superhero franchises that were really starting to ramp up at this time, early 2000s, on their channels with commercials intertwined in. And I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. And looking back, some of it holds up. Other things don't, but I'm excited to get into it.
Dude,
so
before you move on, Turner Television, the greatest for superhero reruns. That is their claim to fame. Yeah, I watched a lot of TV superhero movies.
Any big blockbuster type stuff. Like that's how
it's so funny. You watch some of these movies and you just anticipate the commercial. Like, you know where it sits.
Well, we might get into it later, but especially in these movies, you can see where it was cut for commercials, especially in these movies.
Totally.
I could see. Usually it's not as just right in your face about it, but like, man, that's a commercial transition right there.
Hard cuts, very hard cuts.
Yeah.
Hard cuts, fade to black. Absolutely. So anyway, let's get into the first movie. We'll start with that. I'm going to read off the synopsis here and we'll get into it. So Peter Parker is a nerdy high school student with a grown man's body and a middle schooler's face who lives with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben next door to the girl of his dreams, Mary Jane Watson. I mean, what could be better? Redhead, who plays her? Kirsten Dunst. She was huge at the time. Man.
Oh, they used her quite a bit to sell these movies.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Anyway, while on a school trip to a genetics lab, an enhanced spider goes missing and bites Peter while he takes photos of MJ that are definitely for the school paper and not just for him at home. Elsewhere, Norman Osborne, the billionaire scientist, weapons dealer father of Peter's best friend Harry. A lot of connections here that are just coincidental, no big deal. Is under pressure to provide weapons and enhancements to the military and test them on himself. He loses his mind, becomes incredibly strong, and becomes the murderous Green Goblin. Peter realizes that he has developed spider-like abilities from the bite, and in an attempt to get money to buy a car, he enters and wins a wrestling match. And, Zach, don't you do a really good impression of Buzzsaw or whatever his name? Bonesaw?
Bonesaw's ready!
Fuck yeah. Oh,
Bonesaw.
Man, I love that. Bonesaw, that's right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Where was I? So in an attempt to get money to buy a car, he enters and wins a wrestling match against Bonesaw. He lets a thief rob the man putting on the fight, and said thief then kills his Uncle Ben. Peter, motivated by Ben's death, decides to use his great power to take on great responsibility and becomes the wall-crawling, crime-fighting Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Norman, incensed by Oscorp's board of directors electing to sell, takes revenge as the Green Goblin, causing havoc and murdering those who've wronged him. Spidey fights him and saves the day, but that prompts Norman to come to an ultimatum. Either Spider-Man joins him or he dies. Green Goblin then discovers that Peter is Spider-Man and that he loves MJ, so he kidnaps her. And that's kind of a recurring theme we might see in these movies, maybe overplayed a little bit. So Spidey confronts Green Goblin, saves MJ. The two engage in fisticuffs midair and on top of buildings, and Norman, thinking he's caught Peter off guard, launches his glider to impale him, only for Spidey to dodge it using his Spidey senses, and Norman impales himself instead. And one of my favorite quotes in these movies just goes, "Oh," and gets impaled. So Spidey returns Norman's body to his home. Harry sees this, vows revenge on Spider-Man. Then Peter, finally having MJ's love, tells her that they can't be together and walks away from Norman Osborn's grave. So that's the synopsis of that movie. On paper, batshit insane. But I actually really like this movie, so let's get into it.
Dude, I love this movie.
Yeah.
I love this movie. I think this is such a perfect blend between like the 70s and 80s comics and kind of what we know today as comic book movies. Like, you feel the adventure that you get from, like, you know, who was it that described Marvel movies as like a roller coaster ride, and that was like it. You remember recently it was like
Martin
Scorsese, yeah.
Oh yeah, he's just jealous.
Yeah, well, fair enough, but like he did, like it was like an accurate description of, you know, what we feel watching a modern superhero movie. It's super adventurous, right? But this one just it totally captures the camp of those, you know, 70s and 80s superhero movies with like the close up on the scared face, and like, you know, there's cuts back and forth between like solo characters, and the cinematography just feels so nostalgic while still giving you like a jolt of that adventure.
Would you say that this is the like first modern superhero movie that would then kick off what we know today as the contemporary, basically Marvel Cinematic Universe inspired? I think I'd make the argument this was the first movie that really showed Hollywood this could make money and that you could actually make kind of good movies from this.
Well, when did X-Men come out?
I was just going to say I think they're around the same time, maybe even the same year, but there's an argument to be made between the two of them. But I think people were more excited, even though like X-Men is a good movie and people received it very well. People were more excited about Spider-Man because he's more familiar to everybody. And, you know, and they play it up a lot in these movies. There's like a patriotism factor, especially right after 9/11 for these movies, and being in New York City. They play that up a lot, which to their credit, they should, especially in the time. You know, it's a good thing to help distract people from what's going on and bring people together, and that sense of patriotism and everything like that. So I think these were maybe a little better received as far as kicking that off and really making people think like, okay, this can be serious, but it can also be fun at the same time. And it really launched us into what we have now, at least like laid the groundwork for it, I think.
I did just check. X-Men came out in 2000, so it was the first one. So I guess I would give it the credit to X-Men. I just kept thinking about this one, though, for some reason while I was watching it. It just felt more like the other ones. I don't.
Oh no, we just lost Andy. We just lost. He was mid-thought. Come back.
Am I here?
Come back. You're here.
You're in your
here?
audio.
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay.
You're coming on. You're coming on.
Camera's loading.
All right. Describe what just happened.
I don't know. Discord literally just minimized, and I couldn't hear anything, and then I wasn't in, so I had to like rejoin.
You just got booted.
I have no idea what's going on right now. My camera's apparently oh, there we go.
There he is.
Yeah, so that happened. No idea what I was talking about before.
Finish your thought. I mean,
completely gone.
No, you were saying, and I think you're absolutely right. What you were saying was that, you know, this is kind of the movie you look to when you think about what kind of kicked off this superhero. I don't know how else to describe it other than phenomenon. You know, like it's like a generational superhero. I think this kicked off this generation's superhero movies, I think, is kind of what you were getting at.
Yeah, well, and let me make the connective thread there too. I see you going. My main point with this is I think it's the fact that this is actually like a superhero. It's the singular superhero title as opposed to X-Men, which is like the ensemble. We know all these characters. It kind of lives in its own little universe, which is connected to the Marvel one. But this was really setting up, hey, we're going to introduce like those superheroes that you grew up loving and knowing. That's what this one, more so like how the Superman movies of the past, some other examples of superhero movies that we might like think to, Batman, for example. Right. But those were like on the campy side. This one, while still paying homage to the campiness, moved in a direction of more seriousness too, where you can actually like tell a full story that isn't just for laughs and slapstick comedy.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can make the argument for movies like Blade as well, which I think came out in 1998. I mean, the late 90s also had a lot of really good, you know, superhero movies, but I think they just kind of harken back to the more like even the 90s, you know, the Tim Burton Batman movies. They seemed more kind of what you were talking about, Andy, like that campy, you know, those original Supermans and you know, even the Batman from you know, the who's like a good example who played Batman, you know, from the 60s,
Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton, you know, well, he's more
Batman.
Tim Burton, isn't he? Yeah,
I know what you're saying. I forget the Alfonso. Something.
Anyway, I mean, I guess my point is, like, I think the last Batman in that era came out in like 96, 97, right? The small gap of time between that and movies like Blade and X-Men and Spider-Man, you see this evolution of superhero movies within, I think, those three titles. You can probably, you know, just look to for a lot of the inspiration in the modern superhero era.
Yeah, but even more so than X-Men and Blade, I think Spider-Man's way more accessible. Kids know who Spider-Man is. Adults know who Spider-Man is. And like literally in his own slogan, it's the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. It makes sense with how this movie and this series was received by people. And again, you know, that whole thing with 9/11, the NYC thing, really just perfect timing for everything. I think it just all came together for the perfect mishmash of things to happen that really propelled this and allowed for the future superhero movies that we know and love today and that we can't get enough of at this point. But yeah, I think the accessibility is definitely the biggest factor in that, I would say. Because Blade's a little dark. If we're talking about those Tim Burton Batman movies, they're campy, but also very dark too in tone. And then even X-Men's very serious. It's got a very serious tone to it because X-Men, the mutants, are an allegory for any given disenfranchised group. You know, gay people, black people, whoever you want to relate them to, you can. It's way more serious than that. This is just a kid in high school that you can relate to, and he's got love drama, he's got friend drama, and on top of that, he's a superhero.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think that's a really good point. Just the relatability and accessibility of Spider-Man is definitely above some of those other things that we were talking about.
Yeah.
So speaking of Spider-Man, what do you guys think of our Spider-Man?
Toby Maguire as Spider-Man?
Yeah.
I think he plays a pretty good Spider-Man. I think he plays a better Peter Parker than a Spider-Man. I think there's a little bit lost from the comic books and the animated series where there's a little bit of it intertwined in there, but the Spider-Man you know and love from all those things is very quippy, very quick-witted, and just insults his enemies at every turn, but with just quick quips and everything when they're fighting. I think he plays a better timid, nerdy Peter Parker than he does the Spider-Man. I don't know if there's enough opportunity as Spider-Man acting for him to really get that out of there, other than like just action scenes where Spider-Man really looks cool. I don't know what you guys feel about that, though.
I think I have a different take, the exact opposite. I think he does a better job as Spider-Man than he does as Peter Parker. But I don't think it's a fault to Toby Maguire as an actor trying to portray this character. I would blame casting directors for this to decide, hey, let's put all these people together. Kirsten Dunst, I get it. I understand where she's popular at this time, but her, Toby Maguire, James Franco, they all appear much older than a high school student. And that's common during movies during this time. You know, they're always like the 20, early 30-year-old who ends up playing the high school student. But there's something about it that it just feels weird. I can't like ever truly buy him to be the Peter Parker when I've seen him in all those other things. And especially now, if I put my reflective cap on comparing to other Spider-Men that are out there, there are some better ones, even in animated form. If we talk about, you know, Into the Spider-Verse.
All the Spider-Man.
Yeah.
James Spiderman. It's my next door neighbor. I think I'm more on Andy's side on this one. Okay. I think he's actually does a pretty good job at referencing some of the animation or animated predecessors. Like he does get in some like subtle but quippy comments, you know, especially before a fight. You know, I think he actually they do a good job at blending like the much more animated action and you know, fights with, you know, the kind of the more subtle, you know, comedy and quippiness that you're used to with Spider-Man. You know, even things like I can't remember any like good examples, so I guess that doesn't really help my point, but you know, he does do things like, you know, what hey ugly, or you know, things like that where like he'll taunt his opponents. He does like taunt his opponents, I guess, as a general term.
Yeah. I actually wrote down one of those lines. He says where is it? Did your nice dress, did your husband get that for you? One of the wrestlers. Like, I thought that was a good line. And there are other ones
dated,
too,
I'd say, but yeah.
Well, there are a lot of dated lines in this movie.
No doubt.
For sure. Yeah, I guess I get your point as far as that. I guess I just didn't see it as much. Like, I think in my head I was comparing it to the animated Spider-Man, which, like, when you watch animated Spider-Man, it's almost all Spider-Man and less Peter Parker. And pretty much all you see for most of the episode is him just flying around and throwing quips at people. And I don't think they did it as much, maybe. And maybe just in my head, I didn't think there was enough of that. But I don't know. I think Tobey Maguire does a pretty good job as far as like just believing that he's meek and timid at the beginning, and then being able to come into his own skin a little bit later on too, especially like he definitely comes off as the guy who never had confidence and then suddenly has confidence. And it's like, you don't wear that very well. I think they do a pretty good job with him as far as that. And he does have a very young face, but kind of like what I said in the first sentence of the synopsis, like he's got a weird blend of like adult body and young face, which looks kind of weird.
Well, I mean, he can't be a high schooler. You know, so he definitely looks and feels out of place in the first movie as Peter Parker. you just can't buy him as a high school student, you know?
Yeah, well, I definitely can't buy Joe Manganiello as Flash Thompson. Like, oh my God, he's huge.
Yeah, this movie I think is a great example of, you know, something that suffers from just like, you know, overaging your cast. You know, it's just like
a casting director fault, not anything to the actors in this.
Totally. I mean, they're gonna deny a job just because they look like they're, you know, 36 instead of 16.
And as long as they all look like they're 36, at least it's consistent. Maybe there's just something in the water, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but when you compare Peter Parker specifically to, you know, like the one that I know so well is the animated series that began in 1994. I think it's just called Spider-Man. And it's like, if you remember, like, he's an adult, like he's like a big guy, like he's like, if you were to like put him in person, he'd be like 6'6", you know, 220, and like just jacked. Like so, like when you see Toby Maguire, comparing him to, and really we've only seen animated Spider-Mans really to this point. So there's you have to make him somewhat realistic. So I don't hate him. Like I think I totally forgive Tobey Maguire for anything. This is my, you know, my very favorite Spider-Man series. So I guess I'm a little bit biased, but I don't know. I think the casting is perfect.
Imperfectly perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say that much about it.
It fits its own little universe.
James Franco, though, we haven't touched upon him as a recurring character to the franchise.
No,
I like him as a character as it's introduced in this one, and I like James Franco as an actor. So anytime I see him in something, like, I kind of like watching what he can do with his character. And this one, I think he does just a fine job. He plays the older high school. I mean, we just watched him in Scream, didn't we? Isn't he in Scream? No, he's not. Who am I thinking of?
I don't know.
No idea.
Matthew Lillard?
Skeet Ulrich? Matthew Lillard?
I don't remember who I'm thinking of now. Scratch that. I think it was Scream 2. That's what I was referring to. Timothy Olyphant's in it. Who's the other younger guy? It's James Franco. No, James Franco is in it.
No, he's not.
He's not?
No.
All right. Well, I like James Franco in this. Ted or Zach, what did you think about James Franco?
I agree. I I like James Franco in this. I tend to like James Franco in a lot of stuff too, even though he's kind of just a crazy dude. But he does fit that, like, kind of. It's hard to buy him as evil. That's the only, like, kind of downside of, like, when he starts to turn on Spider-Man. We haven't even gotten to Spider-Man 2 yet, but that's when I think his character suffers the most. But I love his just like, hey buddy, like, we're gonna get through this together, but still, like, also super elitist. Like, and you feel it from you know, Peter is like, oh god, I just fucking hate this guy. Yeah. But he's like, friends with this dude? Yeah, exactly. So I agree. I love Harry in this movie especially. I think he really shines here.
Yeah, in the first movie, I think between the way that James Franco, I'd say, like, he probably plays two different archetypes pretty well. It's either the goofy pothead or the rich douchey asshole, which is what he is in this movie, and he plays it very well. I mean, between he's pretty misogynistic toward MJ when they're dating. He really only wants to be with her at a certain point to impress his father. Like, he worries about how she looks to his father. He's definitely got daddy issues. I put that in my notes because, like, his whole motivation is that his dad does not think he's enough in this movie. And right. And that culminates in later on when his father is dead. Like, he wants so badly to get revenge for that because he never, at least I felt, he never got a chance to, like, become that son that his father wanted him to be while he was alive. So he's almost pissed at Spider-Man for taking that away from him. But on top of that, he, swoops in on the girl that Peter likes too. Like he's got no boundaries as far as that stuff. So he plays that very well. I'd say where I don't like Harry is in the next two movies, and it's really just how his character is written more than anything than the acting. It's just really what happens to him and with him more than anything. But in this movie, I think he plays it perfectly. It's written perfectly. And he's one of the stronger characters in these movies.
It's a great call out, when you're talking about his motivation through this whole movie, because it really does totally kick off the next movie, and the motivation for his father's kind of vindication that he just can't let go of. And you feel that toxicity from him throughout the entire next movie. I guess, what about MJ?
Let's parlay. Or we can talk about MJ. I was going to say parlay that into Norman, but MJ is like the center of everything. MJ is obviously like, she is literally the girl next door. Beautiful redhead. And she's got some stuff going on that there's like implied, I guess, maybe abuse going on with her dad just kind of yelling at her in a wife beater as she goes outside. She definitely doesn't have the life that she wants. And like, that's how Peter and her really connect, is what their dreams are. Especially like midway through that movie when they're out there both taking out the trash and talking about what they want to do. She wants to become a dancer or performer. He talks about how he wants to, just live in the city essentially. So that's a big connection there for them. And she's also just a huge plot device. I mean, what better way to get Spider-Man to where you need him than to just kidnap MJ? And it's kind of funny, like half the time they accidentally do it. They're just like, convenient, beautiful person to kidnap here. I'm going to take her. And it just so happens that Peter / Spider-Man always wants to go and save her. And then they have like one of the most iconic kisses in maybe cinema history. I think like people really, I don't know, like such an iconic kiss, that upside down Spider-Man kiss. I think people were trying to recreate that a lot. If we had social media back then, that would be all what TikTok is just recreating that with some shitty dubstep in the background somehow. But what do you guys have on MJ?
I think that she is pretty much just that, which is a plot device.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say that she doesn't have any character, because she does. I like Kirsten Dunst as MJ. But I mean, there's one purpose that she exists, and it's the motivation for Peter Parker. That's it. Along with Harry at that point too, the struggle between them over her. That's all that exists. That's like the main conflict, really. It's not even like saving the neighborhood. It's MJ, for the most part.
I'm gonna dislike her later on in the movies, more so in this first one, but I feel like it's a real shame to the character of MJ, at least from like what I think I remember from the cartoons. This one literally just like introduces her as a plot device and then never gets away from it. It's like constantly that like Spider-Man or Peter Parker's goal is just to impress her. Even like that motivating thing, Tad, you referenced the conversation by the fence. The next thing that happens from that isn't like anything good to fall from it. It's what leads to ultimately the conception of Spider-Man, but also the death of Uncle Ben. Like he decides, I need to impress MJ. So what do I need to do? I need to get a car, because that's what the douchebag boyfriend drives. So, a fancy car. So let me look up the price of fancy cars back in 2002. And see what they cost, and then let me try to win some money by doing something in a fast money scheme. So it's like this whole character like just became a way to motivate us to get to the ultimate turning point for Peter Parker to turn into Spider-Man, which is the death of Uncle Ben.
And that's really one of the big themes of the movie is with great boner comes great responsibility.
Okay, we're talking about the MJ character right now, but I didn't say it before, and it ties together with this perfectly. Is that Peter Parker in this movie? He's a simp. He is, and I'll talk about my transition of this character throughout these films into the various roles that he's. But he is truly a simp in this movie, in every possible way, and she feeds off of it, and that is what motivates him. So you can basically say that Spider-Man is a simp in this thanks to MJ and allowing this to continue.
110%. I was going to ask your simp cuck analysis, but I figured I would wait till a little longer in the podcast.
Well, it gets really intense in the third one where it's a whole new like theory I've developed. So we'll save it.
Okay.
Oh, I can't wait.
I do agree. I think, even like from the beginning when he has to take the pictures. Oh my God. It's just, he's so awkward. He's so cringy. I don't know how she could ever have any attraction for him. Like, he's just so awkward the whole time. But yeah, that's like, again, it's his main motivation. This girl that really, prior to now, never even paid attention to him.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Like, now that I think of it, outside of when she finds out he's Spider-Man, which is not in this movie, why does she like him at all? Like, other than that he comes off as kind of sweet, but honestly, more than anything, he comes off as an awkward creep. I mean...
Exactly.
He's saying that he's taking that picture for the yearbook, but damn well 17, 18-year-old guy is taking that picture home and he's not putting it in the yearbook. Let's just say that. And if he does, he's got a couple copies, I guess.
No, it's 100% in his top drawer, and she knows that by 100%. She knows exactly, like Andy said, like she's she's feeding off of it. She loves it. And she's like that mean girl. She's like, oh, what was your name again? Like, and she just loves like the fact that you can't have her.
Yeah. Well, she also goes through boyfriends like they're toilet paper. She has Flash Thompson in the beginning. Then she's dating Harry by the middle of the movie. And then she's in love with Peter at the end of the movie. I mean...
Well, actually, she falls in love with Spider-Man first.
Well, true. That is true. And that's a total stranger who could be anybody under that mask, by the way. But that's all she's about at that point. And that goes into the next couple movies, too.
Well, I want to say, though, we are not objectifying her. No. At least not intentionally, but it's so hard to talk about MJ because she's so objectified in this movie. It's hard to even get away from that subject, which is probably the, like, upon rewatching it, in adulthood, is the worst part of the movie, is how they use MJ. It's just disappointing,
Yeah, it doesn't age well. But at least you can look back on it and talk about its faults, I guess. And it's not as bad as it could be, I guess. It's not objectifying her in the worst way. There are definitely worse ways that could have been portrayed. So it's about as family friendly as you can make a woman just be a piece of meat plot device.
Yeah, exactly.
Another thing to add to this topic of the MJ character, Leslie's opinion of her this movie, one thing that she commented on was her hair throughout the movies. So in particular, this movie, it's like the really crazy fake redhead, and it changes in all these movies. But this, like, even to the point where they made it like her hair isn't real. Like, she's not a real thing. She's an object to just get us through this movie. We won't even allow the actress to have her real hair for this. We'll dye it a fake red or whatever we did to it to make it not look real.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an excuse to get the hot up and coming actress into the movie, and she has to have red hair because Mary Jane has red hair in the comics. You can't change that.
Well, I mean, they could, but
No, I know.
Not in 2002.
Right. Yeah. I guess if there's an argument to be made, like a time that you couldn't change that, it's like when, we talked about how this like launched everything. You definitely couldn't, as a studio, have somebody that didn't at least have fake red hair.
Yeah, no, I think they really did try to go as close to the at least the most well-known aspects of the comics as they could,
Yep.
Including everybody being 35.
Yeah. Well, we spent way too much time on MJ. Let's move on to Norman Osborn, a.k.a. the Green Goblin. So
Yeah.
I love Willem Dafoe. We've talked about him in other episodes, specifically his man bun in Aquaman, one of my favorite things of all time. There's nothing better than Willem Dafoe playing the Green Goblin. He is like comic book personified. He could not even wear the mask and look like the Green Goblin. I mean... He's got such a unique kind of scary goblin-y looking face. To like his credit, it's not even an insult. It's amazing like how much he looks like the character he ends up becoming. And they get right into his whole origin story. They're just like, yep, he's under pressure. He's going to use himself as a lab rat here. He's going to put himself into the chamber with all the performance enhancers that, of course, are green. We have to use that to show that he's going to become the Green Goblin. And he becomes a murderous lunatic after that, who apparently forgets about all that in between spats of murder and rampaging. And eventually, like, comes to embrace the Green Goblin side of him when the Green Goblin in the mirror is like, hey, man, things have been going pretty good for you lately. You want to stick with me. But then they've got that great dynamic between him and Harry. That's one of my favorite relationships in the movie. And I do love, too, that like they throw in that he wants Spider-Man to join him, if not kill him. But I do like that he like respects Spider-Man enough to be like, hey, you're super powerful like me. Let's wreak havoc together.
Yeah, I think that's, to their knowledge, they're the only ones kind of like each other, at that point. I mean, eventually we get introduced to a whole lot of meta humans, but at this point, it's really isolated to the two of them. And I think that kind of drives like Norman knows that at least throughout the movie, he learns that he becomes this way because of his experiment. And he finds out all about, his powers and somehow gets an arsenal for a military, at the drop of a hat. So right behind a mirror in his house. So
that's one of the best parts.
That came up quick. He got fired and then got an arsenal. It's pretty crazy, but I mean that's just part of the campiness that you kind of throw your reality out the window at that point. But anyway, I think that you're absolutely right when you talk about like this could not be more perfectly cast. The Green Goblin is Willem Dafoe. It's one of my favorite villains like ever in a superhero movie. Ever. And I know it's like really nostalgic for me, but he is just the best. I love Willem Dafoe, especially in this role.
I think it is so good that I would take him in a newer Spider-Man movie, like put him in the MCU, pull his character. It is so grounded and yet still comical because of the way he is as an actor. It's believable. It fits in the campy. It fits in the very much grounded MCU version of Spider-Man as well. So like kudos to, as I was just, throwing shade at the casting directors for picking
Right.
most of this cast. But at least, hey, Willem Dafoe, perfect. Couldn't have done better than this. I'll throw the relationship with him and James Franco. I like James Franco as an actor. I believe what he does, the characters he portrays, the relationship between the two of them. I believe it. I believe it through all these movies. It establishes well in the first one. His even reoccurring like goblinness will stay throughout these movies with Harry. So like, hey, great job, great casting. It works. Kudos to them for that. Other things suck, but love Willem Dafoe. Love the Green Goblin in this.
Yeah, he's just such a cool villain too. Like this is another point in when like you kind of see the evolution of these comic book movies. Like he is just such a cool villain. He's such a cool villain. Like you don't see this in those earlier movies, and you see when he's flying around, and that still looks good today. Showing him on his glider and stuff. I just love him. I love him so much.
And they did our boy dirty by having him get stabbed in the dick too. So like,
yeah. I mean, man. I think it was more like his pubic area, but
yeah, I think it's supposed to be the abdomen, but it looks like it's in the dick.
He's very short. Just remember, extremely short.
Oh, he's a goblin. He's pretty squat,
Yeah.
But yeah, he plays two characters essentially. Like you said, Andy, Norman Osborn is actually like a very grounded character and believable, and like he gets very upset like a lot of these CEOs in these movies do when the board of directors undercuts them and loses his mind over it. But then the comic book character comes out, and that's like his surrogate, his avatar, with which he commits the acts of atrocity that he really wants to do. And then they come together and work as a team and become one. And you really see that in that very last scene when he unfortunately accidentally kills himself. He's talking to Peter as Norman and like trying to relate to him as like, he calls him son, and like, I've always loved you as a son, and you're Harry's best friend. And then suddenly he just switches to Godspeed, Spider-Man, and tries to shoot him with the glider. And it's just so good. And then like I said, my favorite quote is just, "Oh," and then he gets stabbed.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I love that scene and the duality between him. At that point, it's all Green Goblin, and he's just pretending to be Norman Osborn still.
Yeah,
kind of talking to between the two characters. But you do a good Norman Osborn.
Oh, thank you.
That should have been the intro clip. Godspeed, Spider-Man.
We can do whatever we want for the audio listeners.
It's the best line. I love that line.
We could change that, but I don't know how you can beat Dig on this,
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
So good in a bad way.
Oh.
We got a couple more characters here. Does anybody want to talk about Uncle Ben, Aunt May, and like to a lesser extent, like a very small character, but also like stands out, J. Jonah Jameson?
Oh, can we just talk about J. Jonah Jameson?
Let's do it.
Wait, no, who's that? I'm confused. I don't know who that is.
What's his name? J.K. Simmons.
J.K. Simmons,
the editor.
Oh,
of the
yeah. Okay, yeah, that guy, yeah.
I mean, talk about comic book characters.
Okay, I know, Andy, we're going to keep backtracking on your statement that the casting directors did a terrible job, because this man was made to play J. Jonah Jameson. He was made for this role. Again, one of the very best casting decisions that I can remember. I mean, so much so that he's now recast as J. Jonah Jameson in a new Spider-Verse.
Yeah, I'm eating my words by saying, if they should bring Willem Dafoe to the MCU. Meanwhile, they already did it with another character.
Yep,
that's true. I forgot all about him.
God, he's so good. Like, talk about like inspiration from the comics and in the animation. He just nails the character. Like, he's straight out of that '94 animated series. but funnier.
Oh my God, yeah. And it feels like something you would see in like a stage play of Spider-Man or something, like just over the top, overacted, fast talking, cigar smoking, just insults everybody at every turn. And I love the duality too of like Spider-Man, Peter Parker working for him, taking the pictures of Spider-Man, but J. Jonah Jameson wants nothing more than to smear Spider-Man. It's like his life's ambition. It's like, this guy's got something in his closet. I want to find out what it is. And that's his whole motivation throughout these movies.
Absolutely.
Which I wonder...
Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I wonder if there's like anything kind of like some subtext with his character too. Like what is... I don't know the Daily Bugle in universe and like what it's supposed to mean. Like, is it like a tabloid newspaper or is it supposed to be like a genuine newspaper? Because if it's the latter, like a genuine newspaper, then like that makes me think he's like the original fake news. Like he's trying to like can change his own story to fit the narrative that he wants based on his own beliefs about a vigilante.
That's exactly it. I mean, he's supposed to be this corrupt, newspaper editor, very much like the, in the newest Spider-Man, he's kind of portrayed as like the Alex Jones, right? That's what everybody compared him to, like the InfoWars, and it's just a different version of that, really, but the Daily Bugle is kind of like the newspaper of the city. I mean, that's what everybody reads. It's a genuine newspaper, it's not just, like you were saying, it's not just celebrity and tabloid, though that is a big part of it.
It's the New York Times.
It's the Times, right? Yeah, exactly. So that is a great point, though. That does kind of add weight to what he's doing and kind of being another, albeit small, conflict for Spider-Man and Peter Parker.
Yeah, he's like a very ground level kind of villain, so to speak. Like, he does not have Spider-Man's best interest at heart. He definitely wants to smear him. He's probably like, you could maybe describe him as more of a sensationalist than fake news, I guess, but he definitely has a narrative that he wants to find something that fits it. But you find out like later in the movies, like in 3, he does have some integrity when it comes to like fake photos and stuff like that. He doesn't like that kind of stuff. So he doesn't want fake news necessarily, but he's like, everybody has a skeleton in their closet and I want to find out what his is, because he can't just be this wall crawling, web slinging great guy. That there's something under the mask. I want to know who he is. I want to know what he's about. And I want to, show every angle of him, I guess. So I think he just thinks the worst of everybody more than anything.
I think he just wants to sell papers. He knows what sells. I mean, I think that's the crux of his character. He's like, I don't care necessarily what's the truth as long as I can make it look like this. And like the fake pictures thing, he doesn't want to sacrifice his integrity of using, false information to spin this narrative, even that he knows full well he is spinning. He wants it as legit as he can. So it's a very relatable thing. It's easily kind of picked out of our social zeitgeist.
Now that I'm thinking about it more, though, it doesn't even fit really what the movie wants to do with it, though, because the people of the town, it's New York City, the people of the city, they like Spider-Man. So I don't know why they would want to pick up magazine or newspapers with like negative headlines of him. It's really only like the police that are after him.
I mean, some of them do, some of them don't. It's actually very polarizing.
I don't we ever see that, though, do we, with characters like disliking Spider-Man? Well,
I mean, there's an example in when Aunt May is talking to Peter about Spider-Man. When the kid is helping her clean out her house. Remember that scene?
Yeah, so that's the third one, though. I'm talking about this.
I think it's the second one. I mean, I guess I only referenced 2 because this is a common thread
Sure.
from 1 to 3. Once Spider-Man's on the scene, J. Jonah Jameson wants to take him down. He pegs him as a menace from day one, so he's got to keep this narrative going.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there are people that don't think he's doing a good job, but we see the firsthand accounts of the people that he saves. So, yeah, they're going to have a different opinion than, some of the other folks who really just read about Spider-Man. He's more myth than anything.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, now that we're done with him, we got 2 more left. We should probably try to breeze through them quickly, but they're important ones. Uncle Ben and Aunt May. So Uncle Ben is obviously a great driving force for Peter, and unfortunately that is due to Peter's selfish actions. He's letting his boner lead him in the wrong direction, essentially, and he gets his uncle killed indirectly, but he's the one who lets the thief go, and that ends up being the guy who steals Uncle Ben's car and shoots him. It very comic booky in the sense that, like, there are so many of these threads that just come together with Peter in the center of them. But again, it's sort of believable. They make it believable enough. But the great power with great responsibility is an iconic line. It's straight out of the comics, but it especially became iconic from these movies. I think, like, just like that kiss scene and just like everything else with this movie, people really clung to these things when this movie came out. I don't know if you guys have any more about them.
I mean, first of all, Uncle Ben, Aunt May, very sweet. I love that grandparent archetype that you get from them versus, maybe the more modern version of Aunt May, at least.
The hot Aunt May.
The hot Aunt May.
Yeah, I'm on Team Hot Aunt May.
Yeah, who is the newest one? Marissa Tomei, I think, right? Yeah, I mean, you can't hate it, but I just like the wholesome, grandma and grandpa vibe you get from Uncle Ben and Aunt May in this trilogy. But I mean, Uncle Ben is really, I think, one of the most important characters in that he really shapes Peter's worldview in how he uses his spider powers, why he's a superhero. He got his powers. He started becoming more confident, up to where he was getting cocky, and that could have put him in a different trajectory had he not experienced the evil against his Uncle Ben. So I think this is a huge growing point in the development of Peter Parker and inevitably Spider-Man. That's really what Uncle Ben is there for.
Yeah, the 2 characters exist solely for the purpose in these movies to provide plot. So it's like something has to happen to trigger something, but then also like the conscience, moral elements. Yeah, we have to teach Peter Parker lessons, not Spider-Man lessons, but Spider-Man will learn lessons through Peter Parker. So Aunt May will give some lesson. I can't think of anything from the first one, but Uncle Ben is pretty much that primary role in the first movie, and then it turns to Aunt May in the other 2 movies. But that's their role. It's like, let's serve this one plot device, whatever we need it for. Uncle Ben in the first movie to be the thing that causes him to go down this path. Aunt May in the bake heist later on, but there'll be these little plots. But the most important thing with these characters is that they're going to give us a moral lesson to teach Peter Parker, so that way Spider-Man can learn from it and save the day.
Yeah, and even though they're his aunt and his uncle in these movies, specifically in this series, they are more parent figures than anything. They are portrayed exactly like that, and they really shape, like you said, Zach, how Peter becomes an adult. Like, he is at this transition period right now between high school and college and turning into an adult, and these are really the things that drive him to learn what it is to be a man. Not to be misogynistic about it or anything like that, but just to be a responsible adult more than anything. And the lessons that you have to learn to be an adult, and they try to give him like kind of the Cliff Notes version of it, and he doesn't really take to it at first, and he always has to learn it on his own. But they spell out the themes of these movies right away. It's literally they could put it on a billboard and it wouldn't be as obvious as they do with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, but they do a great job with it. I will say Aunt May gets kidnapped almost as much as MJ, or gets close to it. Like she does get confronted by Green Goblin in the first movie, and like she's injured, so that's motivation to kind of draw Spidey out. But then in the second one, she, like you said, Andy, the bank heist, she gets kidnapped in that one. And it's just one of those things, too, where it's like Doc Ock happens to be at the bank, Peter's at the bank with his aunt, and that's the lady he decides to grab. And, of course, Spidey's going to go right after him. Yeah. It's just kind of funny how they're like, yep, right on the nose. We're just going to go for it like that. But these are comic book movies, and you just got to turn off your sense of disbelief with these. But they're great characters, and they're huge for those character moments for Peter.
Yeah, they're just his influencers, really. I mean, and you know, you mentioned like them shaping him as an adult, you know, but he's got to take this transition from, you know, it's a teenager to adult on top of this transition of being a regular person to a superhero. So not only does he have to be a functional person in society, but he's got to learn how to use this newfound gift, you know, for good and for the, you know, the benefit of all versus himself. And so I think him actually being Spider-Man, it gives him that weight, gives what Uncle Ben and Aunt May have to offer more weight.
Unfortunately, it is undercut in this third movie by the development of a new character they introduce. But at least in the first two movies, that moral choice holds up. Ben's lessons realized.
Well,
I mean, try to retcon things a little bit.
Yeah.
You know,
because the motivation for Spider-Man is, had he made because it's all about Willem Dafoe says this throughout the movie. He's like, you have to choose, like, to do something. Like they're always gonna view you to be bad. You have to make the choice. And Peter's like, oh, you had a choice. You could have made the choice, and you didn't. And then that's why he blamed himself. He had the choice in that moment. He chose vengeance over doing the right thing. Meanwhile, we learn later on, no matter what had he done, the person who actually killed his uncle probably would have done it anyways.
Well, yeah, but perception is everything. I mean, the fact that he thought that he had let that go shaped him, you know?
Yes. But I'm just saying that later on they're going to undercut it as like it didn't really matter. Like, oh,
I don't think it undercuts it at all, actually. But we can talk about that once we get there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think people would forgive you if you just kind of ignored a dumb plot thread from the third movie.
Well, there's
maybe
a couple, I think, but
yeah. That does it for characters, yeah.
I'd say we'd be remiss with Marvel movies, especially without talking about cameos. Obviously, you've got Stan Lee. I wasn't sure if this was the first Stan Lee cameo.
Ted, was he in X-Men? Was he in X-Men at all? I don't think he was either.
I'd have to rewatch, but I don't think he was. These cameos were kind of weird, though. Like, I really like the ones in the current MCU way better than these, because if I'm remembering correctly, in the first one, it's like he kind of just moves somebody out of the way, and it's like, oh, that's Stan Lee. Like, if you're in the know, you know that's Stan Lee. But it's just like, well, he asked to be in the movie, and we just shoved him in. It almost seemed like they begrudgingly did it. I don't remember what the second movie one is, but the third one is actually like a decent one where he ends up talking to Spider-Man, and he gives homage to something that he says in a lot of his comics. And I've read like a lot of the original run of the X-Men, and a lot of his blurbs that he writes at the end of his comics, he ends with "Nuff said," and he says that to Spider-Man at the end of that. So I really enjoyed that one. But the first two, I think, are kind of just like, let's put the old man in.
more like an Easter egg than anything else that turns into something a little more meaningful. But definitely not as good as MCU. Another, I'll throw it out there. Octavia Spencer has a very brief role in this. Did you catch that?
Yeah. She's taking in the entrance at the wrestling ring.
And there are going to be other characters of like different, more famous actors that I feel like shouldn't have been portrayed as like these background characters, but they're in there. And every time they popped up, they draw me out of it. I'm like, oh, it's so and so from that thing, or like whatever. Like, why are they here? And they're like, they'll have like a couple lines of dialogue, and that's it. Never see them again.
I mean, that was probably a big role for Octavia Spencer at the time.
At the time, oh, absolutely.
You know, like she got a speaking role in a movie, and it was 2002. That had to be like the very beginning of her career.
Yeah. And another one, I think she shows up first in this movie, is Elizabeth Banks is the secretary at the Daily Bugle. And that's another one that's like, that's Elizabeth Banks. She's huge. But at the time, you got to think, like you said, that's got to be a big role for her at that time.
Yeah, that's probably a better example.
It was going to be another couple years until something like, I don't know, like Zack and Miri Make a Porno,
like
or
the Judd Apatow movies.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Those raunchy comedies where she started popping up in. Do we have any more characters, or do we want to move on to other topics?
I think. Are we ready for the next movie?
Well, we didn't talk about music at all.
Yeah, we haven't talked about.
All right. Oh, all right. Go ahead. Somebody start. I got something to say about CGI.
Well, let's go CGI. The first thing I noticed for CGI, and it just doesn't hold up very well, and it's like whatever. The intro to the movie with the webs and the logo and stuff is very much like just computer generated. It looks like a background that you'd make like a screensaver for something in like 2005 or something. Like it's fine, I think, for the time, but looking back at it now, it's very dated.
Ted, real quick with that, I like what you said there about like not appreciating what it looks like because it looks bad CGI. I will say I liked it how though in all these movies it was like previously on the last movie you watched, let's get you caught back up with all these points that have important things that happen, and then also a little like Easter egg with the third one. They actually have it be Venom's like stuff that comes around the spider web too. So it's like a tiny little thing like to connect it. So as much as I don't like the look of it, I'm right there with you. I actually like how they use this, which was like an old style movies. Let's run through the opening credits through some kind of like animated thing.
Yeah. I'm not personally a big fan of like the recap kind of thing, but I do agree as far as like the intent of it. Like it was all spider webs and all this different stuff in 3D generated stuff. It worked, and I think I know what they're going for. It just doesn't hold up very well, and that's fine. I'm personally just not a big fan of the whole recap thing because I always think, like, especially in a series like that, if you're watching Spider-Man 2 or 3, you better have watched Spider-Man 1. That's just me personally, and I don't know. Maybe that's just like the current culture of like when you go to see the new MCU movie, you probably watch a couple of the movies that were right before it, or if you watch the new Star Wars movies, you're going to watch the entire series through once, and maybe that's a new thing currently, and maybe that wasn't as big back then, but
you're absolutely that you hit it on the head. I mean, that's just today's culture. That's what we're used to.
Yeah.
So, going back to, again, I mean, we've already talked about it. I mean, this is probably one of the first movies that kind of set off this modern era of superhero movies. And so maybe not everybody did see Spider-Man 1. Maybe they're going into Spider-Man 2 because they heard Spider-Man 1 was great. It had great success, and they like Toby Maguire, and it's a date night movie. Movies were a much different event back in the early 2000s. You go to the movie just to hang out and watch a movie on a date with some popcorn. It was more of a social event than, the reason we go to movies now. I don't even want to sit next to my friends when I'm watching a movie. I want to be able to, don't talk to me. I'm watching this movie, just, it's a totally different experience now. So I guess my point to all that is, when I watch these movies and while we've done this podcast, it's been really interesting I think in my perspective is like when I watch a movie that is not from, the 2010s, I instantly can transport my brain back to the time that movie was created, and none of that stuff really bothers me. Like, I was going to touch on the CGI, in general with that point, is that a lot of it's not awesome. A lot of it doesn't hold up to today, but I don't notice that really when I'm watching it, because my expectations are that this was made in 2002, and it just totally, it creates a feel, and a texture more than takes away from the movie, in my opinion.
I'd even go further than just say, like, it isn't actually that bad. It's when we've looked at this time frame, like Matrix that we've reviewed. The Santa Claus is different because it's way different budget, type of situation. Yeah. But at least I'm trying to think of what other franchises we've done that have been late 90s, early 2000s. Scream, not as big budget with Hollywood, not CGI there, but it doesn't. It's not terrible. Obviously, it's not good. It's better than the prequel CGI, I think. Like, if I'm comparing what you see, and there's just a lot of it that happens, so maybe that's why it stands out more so to me. I would say I like this better than prequel CGI at the end of the day. And then I wrote down one scene, actually, particularly to pay attention to the CGI, was the fire, like, brawl that happens at the end between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. How I thought was like, wow, this actually looks way better than I thought it was going to. When I remembered this scene was coming up, I was expecting, I had it already written down in my notes, CGI, get ready to type this, and I was like, oh, pretty good. I actually didn't think that was bad at all. So I think it holds up still a little bit. Not good at all. I'm not saying like it would pass today's standards, but at least in terms of viewing, doesn't take me totally out of the film while watching.
Yeah. And on top of that, you have to think about, too, this is the first movie in a series, so the budget's going to be smaller because they're testing it out. Again, we're talking about really launching this whole new superhero era that we have now, and they didn't know what it was going to become at that time. So you had to save your best CG and most of your budget for that big climactic fight. So, like, even though I can say this stuff doesn't hold up, I do appreciate it, and it doesn't look that bad. I only have a couple scenes where it's, like, really noticeable, and it's just because of, I think it's really just, like, what we're watching it on compared to what we were watching it on then. Because, like, HD TVs in 2001, 2002, not everybody had them yet even, and they were more expensive. I think people were still watching stuff on tube TVs a lot, and you'd maybe only see this in the theaters, this kind of detail. And like the only other scenes I can think of are like when he's testing out his powers and he's jumping from rooftop to rooftop. They do a from the sky kind of like sky cam kind of deal. That doesn't look great. But honestly, throughout the series, the things that look worst are when they're trying to animate people in regular clothing. What does look really good is people in costumes. They do a good mix of practical effects. The costumes for both Spider-Man and Green Goblin are so high quality. Like, they look so fucking good. Like, to the point where I had in my notes, I'm like, it's the suspension of disbelief, but like, you see Peter sketching his pictures of what the Spider-Man costume is going to look like. It's like, how did he get the material to make this like sweat wicking, like almost like Under Armour kind of looking stuff that he's wearing? Like, it looks so good. How did he ever do that? And Green Goblin too, even though it's like probably in reality all plastic, it looks like it's metal armor more than anything, and it just looks great. There's only a couple scenes that I can really say like look bad, but again, you got to look at it through the lens of time and where they put it into the movie. Like you said, Andy, that last scene, they had to just splurge their entire budget on that probably, and it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. And along the lines of that last scene, I wanted to bring up some of the choreography as well, and I think that fits into this as a subcategory a little bit. You know, in the last fight between Spider-Man and Green Goblin, I don't know if you guys noticed, but every single hit on each other, they send each other flying until something stops them, and it's just a really nostalgic fight sort of style for me. Like, just a big punch just sends them flying until they hit a wall, and that's the only time that they stop. There's not
like
really
a Dragon Ball Z fight.
Yeah, exactly. It's not really like nuanced at all. You know, some of like the aerial fight scenes are really cool. You know, when Green Goblin's flying, and even Hobgoblin in the second one. Or third one actually. But at any rate, you know, I think the all of that kind of just brings me back into a time where you can watch those types of things that might stand out against a movie from the 2010s. I think that's kind of like when everything got better cinematically, you know. But you feel that nostalgia and texture from those aspects more than it just taking away from the movie as a whole, in my opinion. So, anyway, what do you guys think about
move on to music then?
Music, and move on.
Well, I mean, it's a Danny Elfman score, so you know it's good.
It's very good.
Recurring themes, which is common with him. I wish I could remember the Spider-Man theme that when he's swinging through during these moments where he's about to go and face the big bad. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's really iconic, especially for this series. It goes throughout all the movies. That's really the only thing that stands out to me, I guess. I don't know if you guys caught on to anything else other than just like the main theme, specifically like Spider-Man heroic theme.
Yeah, I mean, this whole score is just filled with accents, hits, and swells. You know, like that's pretty much the textures that Danny Elfman used to create this this very texturized score. You know, you don't notice it a lot. It has a perfect underscoring kind of quality to it, where it just enhances the visual component. You know, especially when he's swinging through, you hear that blasting horn and string section, you know, but it's still not your focus because of the, you know, kind of big visual component of the sequence that's happening there. And I think they pair very well. But I mean, that's Danny Elfman. He's great.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite. I like Danny Elfman music. The superhero business of it reminds me too much of the campiness with the Batman Danny Elfman music. There were pieces that I don't remember if they were themes or they were just kind of that like background music that it provided, but they did pull me out of it because I just did think it was cheesy and it was something I wanted to pay attention to, is listen to the music in this to see how it fit. Because I think the modern superhero movies do a really good job. Like Alan Silvestri with the Avengers music knocks it out of the park. The guy who does the Star Wars and the Black Panther, I can't say his name, Ludwig, whatever. I think he does an incredible job with music. And maybe we're just at a completely different level. But at the same time, it's not the same weight that like I get from John Williams with his orchestral scores. Danny Elfman's feels different. So the fit for the Spider-Man, yes, with the campiness of it, fits really well. But what I think I like about the superhero movies going forward is they're moving away from the campiness. So that was an interesting juxtaposition to see more modern MCU type stuff with still the campy and coming out in the music.
I think it's an interesting analysis because I do feel the drama in this score still. You know, it's there. Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you point to like the Tim Burton movies, Tim Burton Batman, who is another Danny Elfman score. They're very similar, and I think that it strikes a great balance. And this again kind of goes to my overall view of the trilogy, but especially this movie, it strikes a great balance between that old campy superhero goofy style and the newer dramatic, stake escalating, action adventure movies that we're used to. And I think the score represents that pretty well too.
Agreed. Well, I think that does it for Spider-Man 1. Why don't we try to breeze through these next ones? Who was going to read the next synopsis?
I'll take it. Spider-Man,
Okay.
Spider-Man 2. All right, Spider-Man 2. So, a lot of what we talked about in Spider-Man 1 will kind of carry over, to Spider-Man 2. So, I mean, and 3 for that matter. So these next couple should go by pretty quickly, but let's talk about the plot here. Peter Parker is now a college student. So we move away from the 30-year-olds in high school. Now we're seeing 30-year-olds fresh in college.
Way more reasonable.
Yeah. He's trying to pay rent. He's delivering pizzas. He's contracted by the Daily Bugle to take pictures of Spider-Man, aka himself. He's just really at this point struggling to manage his time. He's fired from delivering pizzas. Just the stress of being Spider-Man is kind of overwhelming him. He's flunking out of college. He's not going to class. I love what is his name, Dr. Peters or Connors, Dr. Connors.
Oh yeah,
He's the best. So anyway, to add to all of this, his aunt's house is being foreclosed on. He feels responsible for his Uncle Ben's death. Kind of like we just talked about. He's still feeling that huge responsibility on his shoulders to his aunt at this point. He lives in a dog shit apartment. MJ, the love of his life, has a new boyfriend, and he's now slowly losing his Spidey powers due to all of this stress. So he's later invited by Harry to see the genius Dr. Octavius to unveil his new fusion reactor. And this was all funded by Oscorp, which is why Harry is involved. And this is, supposed to provide a new clean energy source, essentially a new, sort of nuclear power source. So when the demonstration goes wrong, Octavius's wife is killed, and he becomes fused with his octopus arms that we see him in every iteration have. So at this point, though, the arms inhibitor chip is destroyed by the fusion reactor after he kind of loses control over it, and it slowly takes over his mind. So Peter then decides that he should step away from being Spidey and focus on everything else in his life that has been kind of pushed aside for his Spidiness. Doc Ock is insane and intent on perfecting his reactor, and he makes a deal with Harry to kill Spider-Man in exchange for tritium, which is like the material that powers the fusion reactor, because he's going to basically recreate this in a weird abandoned dock house, I guess, like a boathouse. Is that what it is?
Port or something like that. Yeah, it's a really weird setting that he decides to put it into, and I guess it really just sets up for how it's dealt with later on more than anything.
That's the only plot. Serves the plot point to the end. It's the Deus Ex Machina. Yeah,
it's the only thing that actually gets it to end. That's a good point. So anyway, where was I? So Peter is now regaining his powers and having his life on track. So he meets with NJ, confesses his love to her, and he doesn't really get the warm reaction he was hoping to out of it. She's kind of moving on with her life.
Well, it's actually the other way around in this part. I don't know if I wrote it wrong here, but she, if you remember, comes and confesses her love to him. And like there are several moments where
that's right. I'm sorry.
Earlier in the movie, but
I'm thinking of the other movie.
I glossed over those. Well, there are like 3 moments in this movie.
Oh my God,
where
you're
he's
so
like,
right. Yeah.
I love you, leave your boyfriend. And she's like, nah. And then it's just classic MJ where she wants what she cannot have.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So
yeah, he's on the other end of that.
yeah, you're right. You're right. Sorry, I misremembered that.
Oh, no worries.
So anyway, so now they're attacked by Doc Ock. They're sitting in the cafe. And he wants Peter to bring Spider-Man to him. So Doc Ock, tell me if you've heard this one before, kidnaps MJ. Unbelievable. Spidey goes after him. They fight. Doc Ock does his best to his best reenactment of the movie Speed, forcing Peter to stop a train from crashing and killing civilians. So Spidey, passed out from exhaustion, is taken to Harry, but Harry is unable to kill him when he finds out that it's his friend. Spidey confronts Doc Ock again, saves MJ, defeats him, pleads with him to just help destroy the reactor, and Doc Ock sacrifices himself to drown the reactor. Like we just talked about, that is the only way that this gets stopped. So after MJ sees that Peter is Spider-Man, she leaves her fiance at the altar, runs to Peter, and tells him that she's ready for the risks of being Spidey's girlfriend. For no reason, in my opinion.
Can I just mention with like that last part too, it sticks out to me like a sore thumb that like so much earlier in the movie, like when she's talking to Peter at the restaurant, she confesses her love to him, but still is in the wedding dress, ready to get married to the other dude, just to leave him at the altar. Like, she is so fucked up. She has no clue what she's doing. She doesn't know what she wants, and man, her character is a fucking mess.
I don't like Peter or MJ, but really in this movie and then the next one is when I really dislike MJ as a character. Like everything you just said, guys, about like up to the point in the end with the wedding. Like her character in this just teases Peter while at the same time her like or him kind of allowing that to happen. And I'll get into my my cuck versus simp analysis, but like it's just so obvious here in this movie that like their terrible romantic relationship that they have is meant to drive the plot in some way to get it to where it needs to go the next thing, and in the end it's like, oh, okay, so like we went through that whole thing really for nothing had we just like announced our feelings for one another probably at the end of the last movie.
Yeah. No, I agree. MJ's not my favorite character in this movie. Again, she's just used as a plot device, and really just moving between guys throughout the whole movie. And I just don't feel like that's fair to MJ. It's just not fair to do that to her character.
No, it's not fair to her character, and it's also not fair to Peter, like that he has to be with this character who seemingly just is so flighty and doesn't know what she wants and just goes from boyfriend to boyfriend. I've actually been with somebody before where like it seemed like they cannot be without somebody as a spouse or significant other. Like they just have to move on from one person to the next person immediately. They cannot have any separation time for themselves, and they are dependent on being with another person. It's almost like, you know, especially in these movies with her being a plot device, her existence depends on her being with some guy.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of psychoanalyze that and, you know, look at her home life from the first movie. Like, yeah, man, that might have something to do with it, you know, which is, I don't think at all intended. Maybe it was, but I don't know if that was an actual intention by the writers or director. But you can kind of see
get into this after that, though. You know,
yeah, right.
You can really dive deep. Well, why don't we talk about like the one new character, because it's all carryover from the first movie for the most part. There's one new major character, unless you guys can think of anybody, but to me, it's just Doc Ock. So,
who is another awesome character?
I know, like, talk about good casting, especially for the villains. I think your point stood, Andy, as far as like the people playing high school students.
Right.
But when it comes to casting these villains, it's just on point. until the third movie. But we'll get there. These first two movies, the villains are just almost impeccable. Like, what's his name? I'm Alfred Molina.
Alfred Molina, yeah.
He is a caliber of actor that's way above this, actually, and probably shouldn't be in this, but he does it so well. He is such a good sympathetic character. He's losing his goddamn mind. He starts off with the best intentions. He's trying to make this self-sustaining, clean energy, and that's still his motivation throughout the movie. But as he loses his mind, he loses touch with his humanity and becomes more machine, Doc Ock with those arms, and becomes less worried about what his actions, those consequences are on the people around him. He really is willing to sacrifice everybody, between making deals with Harry to get Spider-Man, between stealing MJ just to motivate getting, well, at that point, it's a motivation to say, well, Peter Parker, you better find Spider-Man, and I'm going to take her, and you get her back, essentially, when you get me Spider-Man. He just doesn't care who's collateral damage at that point. He's just taking hostages. He takes Aunt May at one point in the bank we talked about a little bit. I mean, he just loses all touch with humanity until the very end, when he has his redemption moment. And, you know, maybe it's a little hokey as far as like the setup and the Deus Ex Machina in that sense, with being in that little port and being able to drown the reactor, which is really the only way to do it, to get rid of that thing. But as far as his character arc, going from this awesome scientist that Peter looks up to losing his mind, to overcoming the machine that has taken him over, essentially, is a really great character arc, I think.
Totally agree.
I think his character probably just stands out to me the most from all these. This is the one movie where I wrote the least amount of notes, but like a lot of the things I'm looking at here all have to do with either some things like I just like noticed random little bits, but like the most depth stuff is with Doc Ock. I feel like they another good job, as you guys already mentioned, with the casting directors for this one. But he's believable. He's one of those another villain that could translate well into the more modern superhero storytelling. So I think they did a great job with his character being the villain. One downside, I'll play negative on it though, just so can kind of give balance to these movies here of things that work but then they don't work for them, is that one thing they depend on is the villains can't actually be like true villains. They have to have some kind of flaw so that way you can forgive them. Like you can even say the Green Goblin, his flaw is he's like, you know, the businessman, he wants to do the right thing, so he's like, you know, I'm going to test on myself and get this thing to work, and it turns you, one of the side effects is it basically into a super villain. You know, the only motivation for him to be bad is that. With Doc Ock, it's the same thing. He sees his wife, this tragic thing happens to him. He sees her die. The inhibitor chip gets broken with this artificial intelligent machine that's on him that he knows, like, oh, hey, I have this chip on, so it doesn't control me. And we can forgive him for that later on when he redeems himself. So it's kind of like we have to give this villain something so that way Spider-Man can like see the good in him and make the right choice, as opposed to being just the straight up bad guy.
Well, yeah, 100%. You know, a lot of these villains are not, they don't start off that way. And that is, I think, a big part of the Spider-Man villains in particular, but I think many villains in these types of movies, is that they do have some shred of humanity left, because they weren't always like this. You know, in Doc Ock's case, everything becomes a means to an end. You know, he is going to do what he has to do to reach his goal of creating this. You know, these arms kind of connect with his brain, and form kind of a coalition, some cooperation between what Dr. Octavius wants to do for the greater good, and kind of throwing out his inhibitions because of these arms. there is meant to be that humanity connected with the evil. And I think that's why I like these villains so much, and maybe that's why I like Spider-Man so much, is because they all kind of share that quantity, all of his villains. But Doc Ock in this movie is actually super complex compared to what we've seen from Doc Ock in the past. And I'm not a big comic book reader, but the iterations that I've seen of Doc Ock, you don't really get all of this exposition on the character. And he is a super complex character compared to what I've seen of him, in past iterations.
Yeah, I mean, from the animated series and I think the comics too, he seems more like an actual villain with a really bad bowl cut. But they did a great job of somewhat retconning and making their own, and maybe with the more modern comics like 2000s on, things have become more gritty and more grounded. So maybe there is an iteration in the comics that I don't know about that is very reminiscent of that they pulled from. But even if they did, or if they didn't, they did a great job of making it feel grounded in reality. But yeah, there's that duality, and it's very similar to the one that Norman Osborn goes through with the Green Goblin. I think he loses himself more and becomes full-fledged Green Goblin, but there is that kind of working together with the thing that is evil. It's more so a means to an end for Doc Ock here, and he's able to regain his humanity and take down the thing that is going to cause all of the issues, and he's doing it all for the right reasons. And I think at a certain point in the movie, he's thinking, especially with the influence of the arms, that, well, it's going to be worth it. There's going to be a little bit of collateral damage, but ultimately I'm going to be a hero. I'm going to be revered, and I'm going to have done this great thing for society on the whole. But he luckily realizes the error of his ways, with Peter pleading to him to. You see that struggle too, where he has to literally overcome and tell the arms, look, I'm in control here. We have to do this. You have to work with me now. It's just a great character arc, and I don't know.
Yeah, I want to ask you guys something kind of about that. I mean, do you think that an intended theme of this movie is that humanity will kind of prevail over technology, especially at a time when technology is advancing so fast? Do you think there's any commentary on the social zeitgeist at the time with this kind of, this intertwining of humans and technology, but the prevalation, I guess, is that a word? I really don't know, but the prevailing of humanity over the technology.
I think there's something to that. Go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
No, you keep sharing your thought.
I guess what I'm thinking is just there's something to that in the sense that, yes, he not necessarily even that humanity will prevail, but what makes us human is more important than the things that we can create. And I think that's
fair.
really
that's a good description.
Big theme of this, but it ties right into what you were saying about it. It is a commentary on that. I don't know if it's the biggest commentary of the movie, but it's definitely part of it. I'm not saying it's the main theme or anything, but the main theme, and I think it's kind of funny. I wrote it down like this: it's learn some time management skills, Peter. Just learn how to manage your time. Don't stress out too much. And it almost feels like a TED Talk in a way.
Don't overbook yourself.
Yeah. Don't stretch yourself too thin.
I like that better, Ted. Because I would say I would like to think that there was some deeper message here, but it at all, it's probably very loose. I think if anything, they're just kind of piggybacking off of what might be a popular movie trope element, like artificial intelligence, nanotechnology. I think is one of the things that they're working on too. I think is referenced at some point. So it's just a popular science-y word in the 2000s. I think more importantly for the character and like the lesson that's being taught here, because I don't remember the line, but it's something he tells Peter at the dinner the two of them are having, or with his wife too, about like something like why we do the things, like why we do science, what you need to do, what its purpose is. And then Peter reminds him of at the end, and that's what convinces him to ultimately destroy his machine. Is like remembering the reason we want to do these things. So I don't think it's as intellectual as, you know, a commentary on the struggle man versus machine. They just kind of use that at the surface level of it, but the more important piece is the lesson that gets taught from this human character about like how we grow and making the right moral choice.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I agree with that, actually. You know, I again, I don't think it's like necessarily the biggest theme of the movie, but you definitely feel that pull, you know, that the pull of that thread throughout the movie.
Yeah. I've got one more theme real quick here, and it ties together with Peter's relationship with both MJ and with his Aunt May. And it's really like the whole crux of the last scene of the first movie is that love in the end is sometimes worth all the risks that come with it. Because like his big thing at the end of the movie is I can't put people at risk. I can't have people know who I am. I have to, you know, despite the fact that like my entire motivation of the first movie was to be with MJ, I can't be with her. And, you know, it even comes to fruition with that scene when they're in the diner or restaurant where she confesses her love to him. And she says flat out, like, do you love me? And then he says no. And you can tell, like, he's obviously struggling with that. And she knows he's full of shit to the point where she says, then kiss me. Kiss me right now. But also that's her trying to figure out if he's Spider-Man too, because she has that weird obsession where she has her boyfriend, then fiance at the time, do the upside down kiss with her, which is pretty fucked up actually if you think about like her trying to recreate that with somebody who's clearly not Spider-Man.
You think that's fucked up? Wait till the next movie. Yeah,
that's fair. But yeah, love comes with the risks that I guess it's just worth the risks. And then telling Aunt May, he confesses to her like what he thinks his role in Uncle Ben's death is, and that takes a lot out of him to do that, especially with what's going on with her house foreclosing and everything. And at first she does not take it well, which is understandable. But then she forgives him and is able to be there for him like she always is in these movies. And you know, sometimes you just got to rip that Band-Aid off and, you know, don't keep things from people that you love.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that, you know, you joke, I should say, that, you know, the theme of this movie is time management. But the reality is, I mean, through this movie, he's trying to lessen his load. And that includes, you know, the weight of being Spider-Man and the secrets that come along with that. You know, it's not only this, you know, physical and responsible load that he feels that he carries, but it's also this emotional baggage that comes along with being this superhero that he really has to live a totally separate life. And so at that point in the movie, he's really trying to just totally clear his conscience, lessen his stress, lessen his emotional load so that he can kind of go back to being normal Peter Parker. He just wants to be normal again after having this experience of being Spider-Man. He kind of sees the opportunity when he's losing his powers to be Peter Parker again. And, you know, throughout the movie, he realizes that, you know, no, he can do both and he needs to do both. And eventually he becomes both again.
And he goes through this transformative process from being just a simp to truly embracing what it means to be a cuck. And that happens throughout this movie. And he ends as a true cuck. Like I was shocked by the character development in this way in the second one when I used my nails, because like, wow, this is perfect. I can't believe he went from totally fawning over this girl just for the sake of trying to get with her to then like basically being thrown at him this whole time, yet he has to either reject it and then want to go back for it and playing into it. only when he sees her with like another male figure. So like, yes, he transformed from the simp to the cuck by the end of this movie.
I live for that analysis.
Great analysis. Again, nails it every
Absolutely.
time. Nails it every time.
I want to forget.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't want to forget about some other characters too. Like I'll say that James Franco, Harry has kind of like a glow up in this movie where he goes from being the high school kid to the businessman, and they don't cut any corners with this. You don't know, like, wait, so he didn't go to college. He was just like high school good enough. Now he'll inherit the family business. We'll get him in a nice suit. We'll have his hair done a little more slick now. Like, I'm all for this Harry. James Franco, nice glow up in this movie 2 years later. And then there are, I don't know if we want to talk about any of the other characters, but I do have some cameos that I want to at least mention that popped in this one. Obviously, Stanley, you know, he has one. We've already talked about how it's not as good as the other ones. But I want to mention that Bruce Campbell has a reoccurring character in this, or different versions of a character, I guess. And I didn't realize it until the second one. I was like, oh, it's the same guy as the announcer. So I wrote that down. He's the ticket, like, chaperone guy in the theater in this one.
Okay.
So it's like cool to have Bruce Campbell come back. In the third one, he plays the host at the restaurant.
Yeah, I noticed him in that one. I never noticed him as the guy in the ticket booth, I guess.
Yeah, he's the guy, or he's standing at the door, letting people in, and he denies Peter entrance because it's already started.
Yeah.
So
I didn't realize he was in the first one as the wrestling announcer. That's a good
wrestling announcer. That one went right over my head.
Yeah,
it wasn't until
I didn't realize that.
I noticed he was in the first two or the second two that I thought, oh, let me see if he was in the first one. So he has a recurring, his little cameo appearance. The actor Daniel Kim, he was one of the characters in Lost. He plays like one of the research assistants for Doc Ock, and he has one line. I don't remember what the line was, but it's something to the effect like, right away, or yes, we're doing that now. Something like stupid throwaway, and that's it. The only line he has in this whole movie. We never see him again.
Well, in Lost, he plays Jin, the non-English speaking person on the island.
So he probably had more lines in this movie than English lines in the first like 5 seasons of Lost. And then the last cameo character that I love in this movie is Hal Sparks, and he has the best cameo out of all of them because it's the awkward elevator ride with Spider-Man. So he's like standing in the elevators. He's coming down because his powers don't work anymore. And it's just like this really way too long of a scene with, again, random actor, Hal Sparks, comedian, progressive commentator who's going to like have his little exchange with Spider-Man and then never see him again, never have another bit of dialogue through the rest of the movie.
That scene hurt me. It physically hurt me. I don't remember it being as long as it was. Watching it again was so long.
It's intentionally played up as too long, but yeah, it goes a little bit further than that.
It's so funny.
I guess as far as like references and stuff, just one that I noticed is the first moment when Doc Ock's arms come to life. When he's being operated on and they're trying to unfuse that from his spine. They attack everybody, all the doctors and surgeons, and one of them grabs a chainsaw, which is what Bruce Campbell's character in Evil Dead ends up having essentially as his hand later on. So I think that was played up on purpose as well, and I enjoyed that.
Hey, before you move on, I'm glad you brought that scene up because I wanted to mention that scene in particular, and I guess I'll just jump in now because we're talking about it. That scene is so perfectly filmed. Like, I don't know how much you remember about that scene in particular, but it jumped all over the place. Just these basically comic book frames, that it just jumps to, back and forth. And that was the one scene that stuck out in my head that I adored that scene. Just seeing, basically going through like 3 pages of a comic book, just for this sequence, jumping for, the hand goes here and it shows the fear of of the person that it's going after. And it's just that nostalgia and that campiness is what I really love about this movie. And that scene in particular, or I should say these movies, and that scene in particular really drew me to that feeling of nostalgia.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's really well shot and really well cut more than anything. Like
exactly.
What you're saying is like making those cuts from moment to moment in that one scene. It's really well done. Anything else about the plot, characters, anything?
Well, I think we should talk about kind of the evolution of a couple of characters. Well, really, I think the last character we really need to talk about is Harry, and just how he not only changed physically, because you're right, Andy, he does have quite a nice glow up. He is very handsome in this movie, and I would go on a date with him. But he also has a total change in character, really in the back, like he hates Spider-Man. Like he has a total new motivation in this movie. It is not, part of it is still the, avenging of his father. But it really is driven, I guess that is what it's driven by, but it manifests in the total and complete hatred of Spider-Man, and it takes over everything. Like he doesn't even care about his business, really. It's the hatred of Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's fair. And that manifests into pretty much mental illness for him.
Yeah.
Or some conglomeration of seeing ghosts and mental illness, because he ends up kind of hearing his father's voice, seeing him in the mirror. And at the end of the movie, that's when you hear Norman saying, you got to kill Spider-Man, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, actually, he finds out he's Peter. So he says, no, I don't want to kill him because that's my friend. Throws something through the mirror. That's when he finds the whole arsenal behind it. And that sets up for Spider-Man 3. Yeah. And we'll talk about that because he's actually not Hobgoblin.
Yeah.
They call him New Goblin, which is really weird. Not a big fan of that. I thought I was going to put in the synopses that he was Hobgoblin essentially, but they called him New Goblin.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
No, I thought of that while we're jumping to it, but I'll just say it now because it's on the top of my head before I forget. I was thinking that the whole time when he made that appearance, is like, oh, wait, what is the name of this character? He has a name. I turned to listen. I'm like, I can't remember what the character's name is, but I remember hearing this. So when I Googled afterwards to see what is the name of the character that James Franco plays, it's not the Hobgoblin. It's just New Goblin is what they call it. So I don't know if that was intentional, a misfire on their end of connecting that, connective tissue. But
well, I mean,
I think that's one in many misfires that goes into the third movie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess let's save it because I do want to get into the background of Hobgoblin too. So anyway, yeah, I think that's pretty much it for characters. Do you guys want to touch on any of the special effects or CGI practical effects? I mean, for me, there wasn't a huge difference in this movie and the last. I do like a lot of the Doc Ock stuff. I think it's actually, I take it back. I think this is a huge improvement in some of the CGI, especially with the Doc Ock stuff. I think that stuff really holds up to today, but I still think there's still a lot of referential filming and cinematography, from the first one to Spider-Man 2.
Yeah. What stands out to me the most is I think the way they shot it, they panned further away from Doc Ock's character when it was full CGI, but it looked better because he's a guy with metal arms and he's wearing the goggles, and it's much better than when you see Toby Maguire without his mask on, kind of CGI, and those moments are really rough for me, and we'll see that in the next movie where I think the CGI should have been stepped up more by 2007. But this was pretty good for the time. There was clearly a better budget because it's more consistent throughout. And, the scenes where he's climbing up buildings work pretty well. It looks decent in daylight, to be honest. And the practical effects where you're close in on those mechanical arms look really good. I really enjoy those. They made like legit metal arms for that. And I really appreciate the detail that went into those practical effects specifically. And Spider-Man looks better too, moving, swinging, everything.
My only critique of it's not even CGI on this one. It's actually the practical effects. It's the scene with oh wait, hold on. I might be mixing this up with no, it is this one. It's with the train. It's like everything that's happening between the when he's stopping the train. It just looks, the CGI looks weird. Like everything that's breaking as the buildings are coming apart, the train as it's moving, and then you take that, put that against the people that are like standing behind Spider-Man, like all crowded up, like, whoa, what's going on up here? What's happening? Oh, it's Spider-Man, and it's very weird to like see like not the best CGI. Really weird, obvious practical effect because it's just like Toby Maguire probably on like the front of a train car that they've got as a little set prop someplace with CGI screens behind them, and then just some background actors standing like looking over. Like it doesn't feel real. I feel like the way that they should be reacting, everything that's happening, it just doesn't look right. It's probably the only scene that I have an issue with in this whole movie.
That's fair. I think there are a few moments during that too where it's not just Toby Maguire and they have the CGI Spidey with the mask off.
That's probably
again,
it too.
The mask off Spidey doesn't look good. It's really good when they have the mask on. They're so good at doing things when it's in costume, and that kind of like goes to like 2008 when Iron Man comes out. The CGI for Iron Man holds up really well today, and it's because they were really good at making these like rigid, shiny, metallic CGI constructs, and it's much better now today than it even was then. But like that's the stuff that looked good. It's when they try to like recreate the face of somebody, and it looks more like a video game than anything.
Was he acting in a green suit for that, or was the face the overlay?
Not even an overlay. It's just so he's in the physical suit when it's like the head on front forward of Toby Maguire, but when you're looking at the side shots when he's got the web, it's all CGI. Yeah, and that's when you see
I hear you. Okay.
The difference there, and it's like the juxtaposition, like Andy's saying, like when you go back and forth between these two things where it's like so real and then just not quite there, it looks really off. If you have that consistently, if you have consistent CGI, it doesn't look too bad. But yeah, the juxtaposition between the two makes it stand out.
Yeah,
but it's still
that's
not
totally
bad.
Fair. That's totally fair.
Relative to the time, yeah.
Yeah, 2004. I mean, it just looks like a really good video game from today. A lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we want to hit on music? I think it was pretty much the same in this movie. Repeated themes.
I say, Andy, let's lead us into Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, let's wrap
one
this
last
thing up.
I got one little thing because I don't know if we talk about this in the after show or not, but just like little things we noticed. There's a Doctor Strange reference in this one. If you guys, I don't remember if you
Jonah Jameson says that.
That's our
he's giving out like
trying to figure out what to name Doc Ock.
Right.
Doctor Strange is one of them, and then another one. I don't know if this connects to Doctor Strange or not, but I thought it was like a weird not cameo, but little Easter egg thing I'd point out. The doctor that Peter Parker goes to see when he's like worried about the symptoms he's having, he's like wearing a white lab coat, and then underneath it is a Grateful Dead T-shirt. No idea what is up with that. Like, what is that a reference to? But I instantly noticed it and was like, that is so weird. What is this to? So I haven't done my research yet, but like internet, when you're listening to this, I want you to go find out for me and then like see if there's anything to that. But I just wrote it down in my notes and didn't look it up afterwards. So I'm not sure if you guys know.
Wasn't it Dr. Connors that he went to see?
No,
he goes to like a physician to like talk, because he's trying to figure out what's going on with his powers and everything. And he basically says it's all mental, which I don't like this doctor, because then he gets philosophical with him and like talking about how it's all mental, and literally sits down on the bench next to Peter.
Yeah.
Oh,
have some
that's
boundaries.
right. I
if
remember
my
that scene
doctor
now.
sat next to me on the bench during my checkup, I would immediately leave and report him.
Well, I mean, you'd probably be concerned with the Grateful Dead T-shirt that he was wearing in your office.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm not
that's
comfortable being here right now.
I mean, I'm cool with him. Like, we're probably having great conversations about alternative things. So,
Well, that's the thing. As long as he doesn't get too close to me, I'm cool with the shirt. In fact, like, I think that's like the doctor equivalent to a mullet, like business in the front, party in the back kind of deal. Like business on top, party underneath.
He just
he's
low key hands him like a tab of acid. He's like, try this, man. This will help you out.
It's casual Friday. He's ready to rip off the coat and just go watch the Grateful Dead. I mean, he's one of those deadheads who probably travels with them when they tour.
heck yeah.
Anyway,
That's right. I was thinking of the scene in where he goes
The
to
next
see
one.
in the next movie. Yeah, so I'll save that one. But cool.
Any other
right.
Easter eggs? I'll just throw it. No Easter eggs from you guys.
I'm not good at Easter eggs. I recognize things once they're told to me, but I can't. I can never like actually notice them in a live watch.
I want to save them for some of the after stuff, and we're starting to run a little long here, so I think we should get into 3 here.
Yeah, my bad. I didn't know when
no
was
worries.
the appropriate time to talk about that. Okay,
No
so
worries.
here we go. Keeping with the clever names for this one, Spider-Man 3.
Boom.
So Spider-Man 3, Peter Parker is still a college student, and he's living in that same hole-in-the-wall apartment, but this time he's with MJ, and he's beloved as Spider-Man. Everyone loves Spider-Man. All the people talk about him. He's the rage. So after watching MJ on Broadway while Harry creeps from the theater balcony, Peter and MJ go to the park for a makeout sesh while an object from space carrying living black goo crashes nearby. But let's ignore that for now. A new character is introduced named Flint Marko, a criminal who broke out of prison, but we care about him because he has a daughter who's got something wrong with her. Whether it's like cancer, she's got like a breathing tube in or something, and then she's
You
got
don't
like a
even
crutch.
say. He's just like, I'm
We
going
don't
to
know.
get that money for the thing you've got.
Yeah.
She's fucked up, that's for sure.
That's not the right word, but okay, move on.
Ignoring that, Harry is out for revenge
Diagnosed
on
doctor. Fucked up.
it's in the DS
DSM-5.
DSM,
yeah,
yeah.
DSM 6 actually. It's coming out
Yeah.
next year. You'll see.
Oh, is it?
All right.
All right.
Yeah. So, anyways, ignoring that, Harry is out for revenge on Peter and has taken the mantle of the Green Goblin. He attacks, and after a mid-air battle, he injures his head and has amnesia. So this makes him forget all the events that have occurred in basically the last 2 movies, and he basically picks up after like the first movie and his father's dead. So things are good at the very least now with Harry. So back to now Flint Marko. So he's on the run. He stumbles into a demolecularization chamber. It's just somewhere in the middle of like, I don't know, we're in Manhattan at this point, somewhere in New York City. But it's filled with sand, and his DNA becomes infused with it, which then makes him the name Sandman. So very straightforward how he gets these superpowers. As that wasn't enough, we throw in this new character, Eddie Brock, who's the photographer gunning for Peter's job at the Daily Bugle, which it's the 3rd movie in, and still he's just like a contract position, not even a full-time employee at the Daily Bugle. But I digress. So meanwhile, MJ is replaced in her show, which really upsets her. She becomes jealous of all the attention that Spidey gets, and then she leaves Peter at dinner after his head goes too far up his own ass. He thinks that he's going to propose to her in this way, sets up this whole plan. Doesn't work out for him. Spidey, while fighting Sandman, discovers that he was involved in his Uncle Ben's death. And in fact, not just involved, but the one who literally pulls the trigger to kill him, which I will later come as a retcon. Distressed, his negative thoughts attract the black goo, which is actually an alien symbiote, and it attaches itself to the Spidey suit. Then Harry suddenly regains his lost memories and sets out to ruin Peter's life by forcing MJ to leave him completely. Peter, moody and wearing the symbiote suit, attempts to kill Sandman, blows up half of Harry's face, ruins Brock's career, and embarrasses MJ at the jazz club she works at. And we're going to get into this scene a little bit, but this is freaking incredible.
Oh, it's classic.
After realizing what he's done, he removes the symbiote in a church bell tower. Brock, who just happens to be there to pray to God that Spider-Man dies, I think is something.
Yeah, he's
what
like,
he wants.
God, please kill Peter Parker.
Please kill Spidey. Oh yeah. Peter Parker. It's not Spider.
At that
Peter
point,
Parker.
it's just
Yeah.
Peter Parker.
Oh,
That's right. It's Peter.
Yeah, hates Peter Parker. So like, wow. So where am I now? I'm lost with this. Brock also happens to be there. He takes on the symbiote as it falls on him and forms this alliance with the Sandman, because somehow now they got to get teamed up together to kill Spidey. They, wait for it, kidnap MJ yet again, lure out the Spider-Man. He gets his ass kicked and is saved only by the sudden heroic showing up of half-face Harry. Spidey defeats the symbiote using sonic vibrations to detach it from Brock, blows it up, and Brock dies in the blast. Sandman tells Peter that his accomplice killed Ben, but he was complicit. No, Ted, I think actually he still kills him, but it was like he got distracted in the moment and pulled the trigger. So like,
yeah, I might have been wrong on that. I really wasn't paying that much attention, so I thought I saw it as is that the case, Zach, that he was like distracted and accidentally killed him or something?
Yeah, because he runs away from him for killing it. Like,
Yeah, that was the real
some
story.
reason-
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he accidentally pulled the trigger. Yes.
Okay, so that must have been Uncle Ben is like trying to talk him down from it. That's where I got confused, because I think I like must have looked down to take a note during that scene, thinking that like he was talking him down, and then the other asshole comes in and shoots him, and then he's like, I was complicit, whatever. I was there.
No, he
part
like
of it.
bumps into him and he
Okay.
pulls the trigger.
So, well, I fucked up. Sorry.
oh no, it's okay. I was reading along with the script here. So it doesn't matter anyways, because Peter fucking forgives him, and Sandman leaves by turning into just some dust in the wind, and somehow flies away. Then Harry dies in the fight, and the movie ends with Peter making up with NJ, and that's the end of this movie, setting us up for the next one.
Well,
No,
Sure happens.
I mean, that's how the series ends. Think
Yeah.
about that. Like,
it's a weird wrap up, isn't it?
Yeah.
it is. He walks into a jazz club that we'll get into that whole thing, but like he should be barred from. He should not be able to walk into, because he was such an asshole in. And he walks in there and just like kind of takes her hand and they start dancing, right? Like they dance and kind of just hug each other, and that's the end. That's how we end the journey of Spider-Man in the Sam Raimi universe of Spider-Man. Really anticlimactic shit.
Well, I mean the fight leading up to that was a great stinger, I guess. But even so, the action was cool, right? But even so, the characters involved are pretty meaningless, and they don't really give any weight to kind of the end of the Spider-Man series. Outside of Harry, Harry obviously that makes he matters more than Venom and Sandman, but those are the villains, Venom and Sandman. Who cares? Again, like you said, we just care about him because he has a daughter. Like, that's not compelling at all. I don't like the Sandman character. I think it's totally a throwaway.
Right.
No.
He has a line that's, "I'm not a bad person. I've had a bad life." That's what he says.
Yeah. Well, again,
They
it's the
tried too
humanity.
hard to drum up sympathy for this dude, and it's just like he's like I said in the thing. He's got a daughter, and we don't even really know what's wrong with her. But like that's just trying to get sympathy points from the get go. That's like how we're introduced to him, as breaking into his presumably ex-wife and daughter's house to make a sandwich, apparently. And he's on the run, he escapes from prison and all this shit, and like they want you to care about him, and you just don't. He's just crammed in there, and this movie is infamous for the three villain problem. When you look back at other movies that try to cram in villains, this is like the reference point for that, where they're just like, well, we're gonna get Venom in there because Venom's huge, and we're gonna get Sandman in there. But honestly, I wouldn't call Venom Venom. There's a reason that when I wrote that synopsis that I called it the alien symbiote, never called it Venom, because it's really just an excuse to give Eddie Brock superpowers, giving Topher Grace as Eddie Brock superpowers. But when you look at it in the comics and in the animated series, it's this symbiotic relationship. They both hate Peter Parker and Spider-Man so much that they work together, even though they don't even really like each other, to kill him. Like their hate drives each other. That's what attracts the symbiote to people, is hatred and anger and all this stuff. That's like originally how it becomes fused with Peter's suit, is finding out that after being broken up with MJ, or at least not fully broken up, but they had the fight in the restaurant. And then he finds out that Sandman was at least involved in his Uncle Ben's murder. But like you said, I think at that point, it's definitely like he thinks he killed him. And we find out later on that it was accidental. But either way, it's just too much going on in one movie.
Well, very convoluted plot.
Yep.
It is, and I think it's really tough to do that in this 90 to 110-minute movie. I don't know exactly the runtime here.
This was 2 hours and 18 minutes, the longest of the three.
Way too long.
Okay, that's actually a lot longer. So, and I think it probably was because it had to be, because of all that was going on in this movie. Some more necessary than others. But, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I actually am so disappointed in being, a fan of the animated series and the more comic material, that, we saw one member of the Sinister Six in 2, right? And I really wanted to see more of that in 3, especially when it was coming out, at the time. I'm like, I would love to see like the whole Sinister Six, with Kingpin at the helm, and getting Electro and Vulture and like all of these, villains. Like that's what I loved about Spider-Man. But they showed in this movie that even with just introducing another member of the Sinister Six, plus another villain from Spider-Man's lore, plus another villain from Spider-Man's lore, it's like it's disjointed, and it really didn't do what I had hoped Spider-Man could do, because Spider-Man has a lot of like iconic villains. Like I feel like out of all of the villain, characters within a specific superhero's journey, Spider-Man probably has at least my favorite, but I would argue kind of the most compelling villains, or at least most widely known villains. And they like Sandman was just such a travesty when they introduced, like, because he's another one of the members of the original Sinister Six. It didn't hit the mark. It didn't hit the mark, especially from what I know about Spider-Man.
Yeah, I would say the Sandman character as a whole is just like not necessary in this movie. I think you could have. I'm not one to create my own fan fiction of what I would want to see in movies. I really like to just sit and watch and appreciate. But this is something so that's stark, that's right there in front of you, because you see that I know we don't call him the Venom character, but I would argue Venom is more of a well-known type of character for a villain than the Sandman is. That's a little deeper of a cut. So why would you introduce those two characters together when one I think is clearly going to outweigh? And then my point about doing my own bit of like headcanon or like retelling of the story, you probably could have a way more compelling story with Peter having the conflict with what's Topher Grace's character again?
Eddie Brock.
Eddie Brock.
Eddie Brock, yeah. The character of Eddie Brock versus the character of Venom versus the character of Peter Parker in Spider-Man, and how like that whole relationship, that gives you your 4 characters right there without having to worry about any other things. Then they have to throw in Sandman, and then we'll bring back in
Harry
what's
in
his
the
name?
new Goblin.
Harry in the new Goblin to act as like that counterbalance. It was just like this extra piece that you probably didn't need.
Yeah, I totally agree. But going back to the Venom symbiote character, Eddie Brock, like there's no character given to the symbiote. And that's like the biggest travesty of this, I think, is that like this iconic character that, again, like he hates Spider-Man, the symbiote does, because Spider-Man casts him off at a certain point. Originally, just like in this, like I think it's a little more believable in the comics, even though like Spider-Man technically goes to space. That's how he gets the symbiote. In this is literally just it lands conveniently next to them while they're having a in-webs makeout session in the park. And it does do the thing where it feeds off of his anger and everything like that and is attracted to him because of that. But that's what drives the character of the symbiote of Venom. And that's why it teams up with Eddie Brock, because they have similar motivations. They both hate Peter Parker. But in this, it's just Eddie Brock that hates Peter Parker and conveniently is there when the symbiote is being dropped on him, essentially. And it just doesn't work. It's just Topher Grace, who's miscast, I think, in this role to begin with. Speaking of bad casting, but
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it just doesn't work.
I think they just took too many shortcuts. They tried to introduce too much, and they tried to take the shortest route possible. Because they did a good job at exposing Eddie Brock. But not so much to your point, the connection between Venom and Eddie Brock, the symbiote and Eddie Brock. And I think it's just a shortcut when he's below the bell tower and it gets on him. Like they could have drawn that out to be more compelling for the symbiote to then have to search for Eddie Brock because he was looking for the perfect host. Right. But it's already just like that point is so far along in the movie already. Are they really going to add another, at this point, G story to this already convoluted movie with all of these different moving parts? And so I think that's what it really suffers from. I don't hate the character. I don't think Topher Grace is a good Eddie Brock, especially from the other Eddie Brocks that I've seen. I don't love the movie, but when they said that Tom Hardy was being cast as Eddie Brock, it's like, oh, that's Eddie Brock. Like that, he is the type of character that you picture as Eddie Brock / Venom. But it is what it is. Go ahead.
So I just want to piggyback off that. In what we think we're more familiar with, not so much what comes later, but what we know from before, the cartoon. Right. Venom is well fleshed out.
Yeah.
The character, you totally get it. So it's like you get this half-assed version, doesn't work.
Yep, I agree. I wonder how he comes off to somebody who is not as familiar.
I don't think that great. It's probably not as bad as what we think of it, but even still, like it's just Topher Grace trying to be menacing, and that doesn't even work. Eddie Brock is a slime ball. That's what he's supposed to be. I think the movie Venom with Tom Hardy takes a little bit of a different angle with it, kind of makes him an anti-hero. But when it comes down to it, the Eddie Brock who associates with Peter Parker and hates Peter Parker is a slime ball, and that's why he's outside of just the hate of Peter Parker, the perfect host for the symbiote. That's
Right.
why they work so well together, because the symbiote, like the way it looks when it's attached to a person, is like a reflection, especially of Eddie Brock, like of the person on the inside. It's like kind of just making that person inside out and turning him into a monster. But yeah, it just was miscast. It wasn't done very well. And, it could have served to have had one more movie to flesh it out. Like you said, they took shortcuts, cut corners. It kind of reminds me of what we've talked about with the DCEU, where they just kind of launched right into stuff. They didn't establish anything. I guess like at least the DCEU was like, here's some emails with some videos of these people beforehand, but that's not great either. But yeah, it's just cramming too much in here. If they had maybe one more movie to flesh these guys out, I like the idea of the Sinister Six, but you really have to do the work to do it. It's just like we talk about with the new MCU. They do the work. They put in the work to establish all these characters before they have the big team up, because you won't care if you don't do that.
I mean, Spider-Man could have a cinematic universe of his own, with, I mean, and I would love to see more of that, just because I just love Spider-Man and all of its lore. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much, and they try to do too much within this movie in particular. The other two I think were well paced. This movie was just tried too much.
I think the only other character to talk about, because we talked about Sandman, we talked about Venom, is Gwen Stacy shows up in this movie. Again, unfortunately, women are used as props in these movies, which really stinks as far as like how important these characters are. Like you talk about Gwen Stacy in particular, like her love with Peter Parker in the comics and other media is like the most tragic of all of them, and like really motivating factor for him. And the other thread there too is there's Spider-Gwen and like all these different multiverse versions of her, where she's like not just this tragic character who ends up dying, but also she's this awesome character who not that she's not awesome in the first iteration, but she turns into essentially Spider-Man in a multiverse, which is super cool. So like to get this kind of watered down version of her, like it's used correctly, I guess, like for what they're going for, but they use her as a prop to upset MJ, to divide MJ and Peter, because they have that kiss when Spidey gets the key to the city, and then later on MJ gets upset because she sees that, and then when they're at dinner, Gwen Stacy shows up to dinner, and she finds out that Gwen Stacy is in one of Peter's classes, and they're kind of close as class
partners.
Yeah, so like she gets jealous of that whole thing. Like it does what it's intended to do, but again, it's unfortunate that like that's all they're used for, and literally to the point where later in the movie, when we talk about the infamous jazz club scene, Peter brings her there as a prop to make Mary Jane jealous, because he knows that will work, and he makes a damn fool of himself doing it and looks like a giant asshole and embarrasses MJ in the process, but it works, and that's when Gwen actually ends up leaving, and because she realizes what's going on with that.
Well, I want to defend the usage of Gwen Stacy a little bit, only because her character has been used in many different iterations with many different ways. Like Gwen Stacy's never the same character twice in a Spider-Man, sometimes she's the main love interest, sometimes she's the conflict in the love interest between Peter and MJ. Other times she doesn't exist. There's just a lot of different iterations of Gwen Stacy, and this is one of them. And I'm not defending the use of her as a prop again, but I will say that I think the execution was more to show that Peter was using her as a prop. It's more of a character flaw than a writing flaw, in my opinion. They're using her, yes, but they're using her to show that Peter at this point is an actual piece of shit.
That's fair. I can get behind that.
Oh, can I jump into my analysis now of the simp to cuck?
Let's go back to the
Absolutely.
simp cuck analysis.
Okay, because it's developed further, and this movie I think might have to be the prime example I'll always go through is the Toby Maguire Spider Man development. But through this movie, he goes from simp to cuck, or he starts off the movie as a cuck, and it begins with the first scene, which is the theater, and he's sitting there, and he turns to the person next to him and goes, "It's my girlfriend." Like, he's enjoying watching all these other people eye fuck her. Like, everyone is just piercing at her in this dress, and she's coming down all sultry like, and he's like, "Yeah, it's my girlfriend." All looking at everyone like, "Yeah, you like her? Yeah, great." So cuck. And then throughout this, because of the symbiote, he becomes an incel in the truest form of like to end up striking MJ in the face to like kind of like culminate in the becoming of the incel.
I get you there. He goes sort of full Chad, like the version of a Chad that an incel thinks a Chad is, because they're always about got to be an asshole. Every woman likes an asshole. You can't be the nice guy anymore.
Yep.
And he does that, and it slaps him right back in the face, doubly because he alienates both MJ and Gwen Stacy in that point. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, Peter's not a good man in a lot of this movie because of the symbiote.
Not just because of that, though. Like, he's also an asshole. The symbiote just exacerbates how much of an asshole he's being.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of harkens back to, when he first got his powers. He felt unstoppable and cocky and confident, and it's kind of just bringing that back up in him. And I actually like that reference to the first movie, where his arc has actually brought him to a pretty good point. He's still feeling confident in himself, but he's doing overall the right thing at the beginning of this movie. But
we got to bring Peter Parker up, but it means we have to bring Tobey Maguire's bangs down.
That's emo Toby Maguire. His hair somehow becomes darker when he's got the symbiote attached. The bangs are just flowing right in front of his face. He's whipping them out of the face.
They're so bad. His stringy, greasy bangs. No emo kid ever looked like that. Come on, I'm a former emo kid. I know. That's not the
fair.
look you're going for.
That's fair. Yeah. But man, what a movie this is, right? Let's talk about that scene, the jazz club scene. Well, even before that, there's the scene of him walking down the street to the music that's only playing in his head, and he's, doing the pointing and stuff like that. Both you guys and anybody listening right now, do yourself a favor and look up the stripped down version of that, where they cut it, because there's a couple scenes that interject in between that. So it's not like a full scene of him just walking down the street, but somebody did a cut where it's just him walking down the street.
It's just
and
street
took
noise.
the music away. Yeah. It's amazing. It's so good. It's about 50 seconds. It's going to make your day that much better.
Link in the description.
Yeah, we'll have to do that.
Dude, it's so funny.
Yeah, incredible. But yeah, he's just feeling himself right then and there. And before that, he's being fed milk and cookies by the weird daughter of his landlord across the hall. She's the type of person, or well, I should say he's the type of person that probably would accept a pig as payment for the marriage of his daughter. That's like the vibe I get from that family.
Okay. Didn't know where that was going at first, but now I do.
You know what I'm talking about? Like,
yeah, dowry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's
absolutely.
It's a weird situation.
That's a weird dynamic that we haven't really talked about, but I feel bad for her in all these movies.
Yes.
She's just fawning over Peter Parker, but also speaking of like
she's
being
excited
a simp
for him.
Yeah, but she's a female simp in these movies.
Yeah.
If I take the reins and talk about simp analysis here, she's the one who answers the phone in the hallway and tells him that MJ's called and she's excited for him, even though she clearly wants to be with him. You gotta feel for her. She's a tragic character.
I agree.
And set up very well, actually, because like in the second movie, you do see that, like where she's eye fucking him too. Like she knows what's going on and just waiting for that third movie for MJ to break up.
Oh yeah.
My favorite line from him while he's going through this phase, he's on the phone like, how about some milk?
Yeah.
Like, you fucking asshole.
I know.
He's the worst.
What a line.
And the milk is a trope in movies. I didn't know if this was a thing. I heard this. I was watching something. Don't remember what it was, but it's common now to see, or not common now, but it's been a thing where adult men will drink milk to make something be unsettling, and it works. Like it's in A Clockwork Orange. What's that? What's another? I forget. I'm blanking on the name of the movie right now. Damn, I can't think of it. But it's the main character. He drinks like a glass of milk in it. It doesn't really help with the podcast, so I'll get off the topic now. But it is a trope that gets used.
I think I've heard that before.
I mean, it is unsettling. I just watched the first episode of season 2 of The Boys, and Homelander goes into the freezer, takes what's her name's breast milk out, and
that's a different
shoves
level.
The thing. It is a different level, but it's super uncomfortable.
That show is worth discussing.
It's something else. It's fantastic. Yes, let's get into that scene though. So he's got the walk down the street scene, but later on he brings Gwen Stacy to the jazz club, and it's kind of letting things play out. MJ goes up there to perform because she's a waitress / performer there, and then the dig on this. And somehow the band knows to play whatever dumb shit he's gonna dance to.
He's got some improv skills, you can say that, on the piano. Had a good riff.
Yeah, you know what? That's pretty great, and he weirds MJ the fuck out by going on the piano in that moment. And I feel for her so hard in that moment because it's just so cringy. But on top of that, your ex-boyfriend's in there trying to show you up with his new hot thing in there, and he's just making an ass of himself. And then he ends it by hitting you.
Yeah, rough ending to an already rough night.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you see him walk down the street, looking at him move the way he moves, pretty much unlike any other human I've seen move. He looks like he's never walked before when he's trying to add some swagger to his walk. And then you see him dancing in the club. Is Toby Maguire actually dancing? Is that a double?
It might be.
I don't think the same person could do both of those things.
I could get behind that.
You know?
I don't know.
Does he actually do that choreography?
This might have permanently damaged Toby Maguire's career going forward. I can't remember his cinematography off my head after 2007, but I don't know if he's got the skills to do that kind of dancing.
Oh man, it's real cringy. Just the whole scene. It's super uncomfortable. You don't need milk to make that uncomfortable. It stands on its own.
Even worse if there was milk in the jazz club. But
a glass of milk.
But let's get off of that and talk about some themes quickly. Unless you guys have anything else. Yeah, we're just saying milk over and over again.
With this scene, I don't have any, I did not like it. Let's just go there.
Yeah, there's not much else to say. Any other characters stuff that we want to go over, though, in this movie?
I don't think so. At least for me, the characters are very hollow. That they try something with them and it doesn't work. Probably the best one, like you said, Zach, is probably Gwen Stacy, and I think maybe Andy said it, but I'm kind of coming around to that idea that she is used as a prop, but it's really to show how shitty Peter is more than anything. But Eddie Brock and Flint Marko, the new characters, really don't do anything for you. Aunt May has her classic sage advice moment where, you know,
Right.
he says he wants to propose to Mary Jane, and she's like, well, you know, Uncle Ben proposed to me at a certain point, only a couple months in or whatever, and I said no. But I loved him, and I just wasn't ready, and I knew he wasn't ready either. And even after that, Peter's like, well, Aunt May, I'm fucking ready. I don't know what you're talking about. And, you know, it's just, it sets up the whole movie where he's still not ready to be an adult. He's still not ready to be that full-fledged adult taking on all these responsibilities, not being so full of himself. And the big thing with her from Aunt May is like, you have to be ready to care about that other person more than you do yourself. And that's really the driving force between that wedge between him and MJ, where like every time she talks about her problems, he's like, yeah, you know, I deal with that as Spidey and all this stuff, but, you know, it's fine. Everybody loves me. No big deal. It's great for me. And he really has to learn to love her more than he loves himself.
I had a different take with that theme. I actually didn't like MJ for it, less so him, because I felt like he was always trying to like give something to relate to. Like, I'm just trying to relate to you. I'm just trying to find something to connect with. And like, she's like a very strange character change in this one, where now she becomes jealous of him. It's less so on him not really understanding her, but it's like her not understanding him. At least that was my interpretation of the events. But I can see how it could be viewed the other way around.
I think it's part of it. I think it's really like him just not understanding where she's coming from when she's saying, like, you know, that one of her big things is she gets a really negative review for her role in the Broadway show. She's having a real hard time with that, which, like, you could probably say she's super whiny. Like, it's a critic. They are going to criticize you. And that's exactly what Peter actually says in that moment. Yeah. But I guess her whole thing is like, instead of making her feel better, he's just talking about how, like, well, this is how I deal with this as Spider-Man. And on top of that, like, I think there's a level of that where she's out there on stage putting herself on the line without a mask on.
And then
he's beloved with a mask on. And it's like, who are you to tell me when I'm putting myself out there? Like, you're doing great stuff too, but you're disguised and nobody knows who you really are.
Well, I think that
makes sense.
But it's also a really relatable issue, you know, between couples. Like,
oh yeah,
you know, and that's actually a very humanizing moment, I think, for both of them. You know, that trying to just be empathetic and nothing more. Don't try to solve a problem. Don't try to let them know that you know what they're feeling. Just be empathetic, you know, and it's a struggle for Peter to do that in this moment. I think that's really relatable, just as a human emotion.
Yeah, he probably thinks he's doing the right thing there, but he needs to be more in touch with what will help his spouse in that moment.
Right.
You know, it might help somebody else to hear something that seems empathetic from him. But especially because he always has a positive twist on it, I think that's really like what twists the knife for MJ is like,
right.
Well, this is all really negative for me and I'm not handling it well. So like, I need something more than what you're saying right now.
Or less for that matter.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, maybe less is more in that case.
Yeah.
Anything else on this one? As far as the plot, themes, characters?
There's one character thing. Oh, go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to bring up the Harry redemption. You know, between Peter and Harry. You know, even after the accident, Harry comes to his rescue. Essentially, he wouldn't have been able to defeat his two new villains of the Sandman and Venom, or the artist formerly known as Venom. Together without Harry in this circumstance. And that's even after he just blew his face off.
Well, okay, so the thing that I was about to chime in is this, but on the opposite end of it, something I really disliked, which is it's a minor character and a plot point. So these two things are intimately tied. It's the housekeeper dude knows the secret. So we have this revelation which is the turning point for Harry to become the good Goblin. I guess we can call him that for the moment. To become good Goblin is to find out like, oh, I'll let you know this like right now. I like analyzed what had happened with your father. I took a look at his autopsy. I saw that the blade that pierced him was actually his own from his speeder device, and that Spider-Man didn't kill him this whole time.
That's the only thing it took.
The only thing, we're just having this conversation now, and now I'm gonna, that's it. He didn't really mean to. I'm gonna go save my best friend.
Yeah, and as much as like it's good to have redeeming moments for characters, he's hated Spider-Man and like Peter Parker for 1.5 movies, and then when he's fighting alongside him, they're a little too chummy for my taste. He's kind of joking around like, what are you gonna do? A couple of James Franco moments, and I'm like, man, that's not earned. I don't know. It was forced a little bit, and like the timing, the perfect timing of the butler just being like, I've been sitting on this. Probably a good time to tell you, like, I don't know, maybe before I lose my mind and start seeing my dad's ghost and hearing his voice and shit, telling me to kill my best friend might have been a good time to say, he killed himself with his own glider. Butler, you're fired. Fucking out of here. You're no Alfred. That's for fucking sure.
Yeah, Alfred would have been on top of that shit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, I think it's another example of a shortcut that was taken to get to the end of the movie. It was not a good setup. It wasn't even a good monologue. It's just like he didn't even say it that well. But it needed to happen, and so that's how they decided to get there. It just leaves a little to be desired. I mean, it happens throughout the whole movie.
Yep, absolutely.
One more little plot character thing too, and just throw it out there, is the Uncle Ben retcon. We kind of just washed over that. I think this is important because the whole premise of setting up Peter Parker, why he chooses to be Spider-Man, is he's given the choice. He needs to do something good or do something bad. He chooses to do the thing that's bad or for vengeance, and as a consequence of that, Uncle Ben dies. As it turns out, and maybe the slight bit there where you can say like, oh, because the dude ran up, distracted him, and that's what caused him to pull the trigger. I guess it kind of allows that thing to happen, but even then, that's just an accident. So I don't know if that same trigger, like if Peter Parker learns that this tragic accident happens, that would lead to it, as opposed to an intentional thing like murder, which is what he originally thought it was. So just your guys' thoughts. I know you mentioned it briefly, like before that you didn't think it was a big deal. I did. I thought this completely undercuts that, and they glaze over it like it's not a big deal. But I don't even see how like that helps the plot at all. You already tried to make us be sympathetic for this character by giving him the daughter with the issue, the health issues. So like now it's double down on the being sympathetic for him, but like, oh, by the way, he didn't mean to kill Uncle Ben. It was an accident.
Well, it gives him a way out. And I'll tell you, the reason why I don't think it was a big deal is because the lesson is already learned. The lesson that Peter learned from thinking that he killed that basically his actions led to his uncle being killed. And he needs to now do the right thing no matter what he feels in his heart, no matter what kind of vindication he feels he's going to get. It's already learned. So this reimagination of the events, I don't think hurts Peter Parker's character at all. It's already been established, and again, perception is everything. He's already perceived that this happened this way, and so it's already shaped him. And new information may be useful, but again, I don't think that it really triggers any major consequence other than giving what's his name, Flint Marco, or other way around, something Marco, a way out at the end. That's it.
I'll disagree a little bit because there's a scene earlier in the movie where I, in my notes, called Sandman Mudman. where Peter with the symbiote suit goes out on a vengeance streak, essentially. Like that's where, you know, basically I put in the synopsis with just the rundown of like blowing up Harry's face, embarrassing MJ, all this stuff. He thinks he kills Sandman by in the sewers just throwing a bunch of water at him and turning him into mud. And like it shows that.
Go ahead, finish it.
I don't know. I feel like that shows that the lesson really isn't learned, because he does feel bad in the second movie about, like, even though it was an accidental death, his anger and him tracking down the guy that he thinks killed his uncle is what led to that guy's death. Similar to allowing that guy to escape led to his uncle's death as well. So I think he takes a couple steps back when he finds out, like, this is the guy who did it, because he's both like an asshole at that point, and he's got the symbiote suit like feeding into his worst desires, and he's just ready to fucking kill the guy. And he essentially does. Like, by the miracle that Sandman is able to survive that, he survives, but for all intents and purposes, he sought out to murder Sandman.
Correct. But I will push back again in that he had the symbiote attached to him at that point, which again is bringing him back to that kind of initial rise of Spider-Man sensibility that he once had. He kind of reverts back to that vengeance, anger, all of these negative emotions coming out because of the symbiote. Once he sheds that symbiote, he again realizes and has a better sensibility to him, and eventually forgives Sandman. And I don't think that he forgives him just because he tells him the story and the events of how it happened. He forgives him because he's no longer under the kind of the spell of the symbiote. He has a moral compass again.
Well, no, so now you're just like, I think that makes it worse, actually, Zach, because now he's like, you're saying that I don't think that's the case at all, because the dude explains what happened. He's like, no, let me tell you what really happened, and that's what causes him. So what you're saying is, like, essentially he never really had that lesson first.
He finds out that that this guy killed him from the police.
Yeah, he finds that part out, which caused him to do this thing. But then later on, he tells him, no, this is what really happened. And that's when Peter Parker's like, oh, now I guess I forgive you for it. No, it's not anything else. The trigger is him telling him, oh, it was an accident.
I understand what you're saying, but at that point, the only reason they were at all in conflict, to Peter's concern, is because he's now destroying the city. Now Sandman is after him. Now they have this conflict already established because of the symbiote. If it wasn't because of that symbiote, they never would have had a conflict to begin with. And at that point, even though Peter had shed the symbiote, the Sandman doesn't know that. He's out to kill him because he needs to get rid of Spider-Man.
No, he knows he killed him. You said that already. Like, it's not because of the symbiote that he wants to kill him. It's because he's the reason his uncle died. He's the true reason. Now he's mad at him.
Right, but at the end of the movie, they're in conflict because now Sandman is after him, not the other way around.
This is true, but what led him up until this point, the whole thing was him saying that, oh, without the symbiote being there. When you add the symbiote, it actually makes it worse. Before the symbiote is attached to him and doing anything to influence decisions, when he finds out that he's the actual murderer, that's when he decides, I need to go after this guy. I need to get vengeance.
Didn't he have the symbiote at that time when he found out? When he was
I don't think he had it on his suit yet. So I think what ends up
he didn't. Sure. I remember that differently.
I'm pretty sure he finds out, and then he has the bad night with MJ, and that leads him to just be like, there's the scene where he's really restless at night trying to sleep, and that's when the symbiote kind of crawls out, like feeding it on his hatred and anger, and then attaches itself to the suit, and then he wakes up like on a building, he's in the black symbiote suit and he's on a building, doesn't know how he even got there. And then he's like, I feel great, all this stuff. And that's when he starts to go after Flint Marko.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what triggers him to go after Flint Marko, because I remember him, being in that black suit in the mine or whatever wherever they were.
Yeah, no, but that happens after the fact. He already wants blood earlier on in the movie.
But he doesn't
already
act on it. He's not going straight vicious. He's not going to murder the guy. He wants justice, but he
wants to murder him, though. That's I think that's what Andy's point is. And like it almost comes off, and I know you're not trying to do this, but like it's okay that he tried to murder him because he was wearing the symbiote suit, when in reality it's like that's not okay. And he was really just, his inhibitions were gone, and he was working on his innermost darkest desires in that moment without any conscience of it. And I get what you're saying with that, but at the same time, like, he got there because he had those feelings. He didn't just get there because the symbiote attached to him and it's like, symbiote's evil, therefore I'm going to go do the evil thing, I guess is like what Andy and I are
I
saying.
totally understand that, but he probably would not have tried to straight up murder Flint Marko had he not been involved with the symbiote.
Yeah. Well,
okay, maybe, but the ultimate point, not even murder, is just like, what is the lesson learned? At the end of the first movie, we get the idea that Peter Parker learns that when you make the bad choice, when you don't choose justice, you don't choose justice, you choose revenge. You don't make the right choice, you go with whatever bad choices, this easy way, good versus bad choice, the most simple way to define it. Something bad, there are going to be bad consequences for that unintentional thing. So he decides, you know what? No, I got to be the superhero. I have to make the good choices. Then we get into the third movie and he learns, no, the killer isn't actually the person you unintentionally killed. It's this other person. Now he's like, oh, now I have to go find that person. And he hears the story, or that's when he admits to Aunt May that, he wants to go out and find, like, or what has actually happened. That was it the third one, or am I misremembering the scene now? Where he's telling her, like, like, I'm the one that killed. Was that the second one?
That's the second one.
Yeah, that's two. That's the second one. There's another table conversation that they have then, which is about, like, I think it's one of the lessons where you have to like do every.
Right, like Uncle Ben would have wanted you to forgiveness. He goes back to her and says,
that's after the fact. No. There's a conversation that happens before, and so yes, he goes, yeah, I killed Spider-Man killed him, and she's
he's
like,
relearning
yeah,
the lesson that he already learned.
That's my point. It undercuts the first lesson. He doesn't need to relearn the lesson. He already learned it. There was no point in introducing this other plot.
It helps him realize what he's doing at the time. It helps him understand that he has not done the right thing because of this symbiote. He's
symbiote. This is all before his motivations, and everything is before the symbiote. He learns that someone else killed his dad or his uncle before the symbiote and him come together.
I know that. What I am saying, and this will be my last my last
okay.
point. After he thinks that he killed Flint Marko, he goes back to his aunt and he says, hey, guess what? This guy's dead. And she said, that's not what I wanted. That's not what your uncle would have wanted. And that helps him realize that he's not on the right path anymore. He's not doing the right thing anymore. And he's starting to realize that it's likely because of, he's had a bad few weeks, right? And this symbiote is exacerbating all of the feelings that are bad, and he's starting to realize that now. And what Aunt May says helps him realize that. It helps him get out of this funk. Do you understand? So it doesn't undercut it. It is a relearning after this new set of conflicts, this new set of problems that Peter is facing.
But ready? So you're calling it relearning. I say that undermines the first lesson. If you have to relearn something, you have to give a different lesson.
But again, it's in direct It's in direct cause from this new conflict that he's facing.
Well, no, it's a retcon. They have to go back
It's
and
not.
they have to
Okay.
go back and change it. They're like, this is how he dies, and then all of a sudden in the third one, no, that's not how he died. This is how he actually died. That is the definition of a retcon. Literally.
All right, we're gonna have to agree to disagree on this because I don't think that there is any as forgiving as you are with the sequels. I don't know how you can't see that my perspective here, but
We'll save it when we get to The Last Jedi, and because I think there's a lot of comparisons to this moment, I'll remember. But let's give it up to the audience. You decide who's right in this. Is Zach right on the moral high ground that we needed this second lesson, or Ted and I right that we don't need the second lesson?
let me be clear. I don't think we need it. I'm telling you the why I think that that all of this happening is okay.
But then it means it undermines it.
All right.
No, no, it doesn't. No way. No way.
Let's agree to disagree because I see both of your points. I don't necessarily agree with all of them to the fullest extent. I think I agree more with Andy, but either way, I get where you're coming from. Here's the one thing we can end on that we can all agree about. Zach condones murder as long as you're wearing an alien suit.
You guys are still missing my point. Still missing it. But I'm done. I quit this podcast. I'm just kidding. It's okay.
Over defending Spider-Man 3.
It's okay. We can agree to disagree. I think you're both wrong, and you're not understanding my point at all. But we'll agree to disagree.
I actually think it's the opposite. That we understand what you're saying and we don't.
Let's just end it. Don't quit because it'll make more work for me. I'm gonna have to erase your little floating head from the logo. You know, it's not good.
Yeah, that's true. I don't want to put you through that. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, anything else on this movie before we get into effects? We've talked about this movie and one whole scene in particular for way too long. Anything before we get into effects, because that's really the last thing to end on.
I don't think so. I don't know that I have a whole lot of effect.
I do.
Comments.
I think this movie in 2007, there was enough time, there was enough technology where these scenes, and maybe you'll disagree with me, but the scenes where Toby Maguire, and again, it's like Toby Maguire, not Spider-Man, is fighting Harry Osborne, and both of these people have their faces uncovered by masks. It looks so fucking bad because it looks like floating heads on CGI bodies in some points, but then other points it goes to full CGI, and it's just rough. And it sucks because like the choreography of it and the intent were actually really cool. Like the way things happen, it's very cool. It's a mid-air fight, which this series has been known for so far up to this point, between original Green Goblin and fighting Doc Ock on top of buildings. But I don't think that sequence in particular works, and I hate everything that just has Toby Maguire swinging around because it looks so bad. I don't know if that stood out to you guys, but like this one to me was unforgivable in 2007. I feel like it should have been better.
I definitely will jump on the bandwagon of saying it should have been better. I just Googled like other movies in 2007. It's not a lot of crazy like big CGI things. Beowulf came out, and that's pretty like, you know, like that's the idea of doing the animation to make it realistic. So I wonder if there's also just like, this is like what they're doing in CGI at the time. Like
maybe
this is the awkward transition phase to the next level of CGI. Like I don't think it holds up. I don't know if that's the studio's fault, not developing enough, blah, blah, blah. But like nothing is jumping out at me as being like, wow, this is what we were talking about in 2007 of great CGI. And in fact, things like, other than what you just said, I don't like Sandman CGI. I think it's really awkward, his transitions between sand and person.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with the symbiote. I think it looks super like fake, like when the scene in the church where it lands on Topher Grace, and like he, like the way he reacts to it does not look real at all. Like it didn't even land on him.
Yeah, the interplay between real person and the CGI thing just didn't match up. I will say I think the CGI symbiote looked pretty good as far as like texture and everything. It had that like wet look. It doesn't look that far off from what we get in Venom not only a couple of years ago. I mean, it's not as good, but I think it's pretty good for the time, and it seemed like they blew all their budget on that. It seems like this movie just had too many high action scenes going on, and they decided to allocate the budget in certain spots. In that first scene where Harry's attacking Peter just doesn't work for me. I think, like, especially if you put the masks on, just do that. That helps so much, and it's probably something in the contract where you know how these actors are. They have to see their face for a certain amount of time, and that's probably what ended up getting in the way of that. And maybe it would have looked better without that, but man, it was rough for me, at least.
You see, I didn't really notice that as much. You know, looking, it's just trying to think about it. I can see what you're talking about, but it didn't bother me as much. I think though the worst of it, Andy mentioned it, is Sandman. He just looks rough. It's just not good enough for the rest of the movie, you know, especially when he's like transitioning into Sandman, when like you see him actually become Sandman. Like this, the features of that model were just terrible. It was really bad. And then all of a sudden he just becomes human. Like there's no real transition there. And when he's punching, his arm becomes, you know, this big sand block, and it just doesn't look smooth at all. But that's the one thing that really jumped out to me was the Sandman, and a similar thing with Venom, especially when the one scene where Eddie pulls back the symbiote and shows his face. That was a little bit jarring, but I think you're right, Ted. Overall, Venom did look pretty good just as the symbiote Venom himself. But when combined with Topher's face, it was a little jarring.
Yeah, and maybe that's a Topher Grace problem, or maybe it's probably more. I kind of shit on him a little bit, but he can't help that he was cast in this movie, and. You know, Topher Grace is Topher Grace. He's going to play Eric Foreman in pretty much everything. So, you know, it's not really his fault. But yeah, that like Andy said too earlier, like just the interplay, like the physics of them interacting together doesn't work, and it's not overlaid well. It is what it is.
I can definitely see that criticism.
Want to skip music again? Because again, similar. Same.
Doesn't change.
Yeah, I mean, these scores are all very similar. You know, I can't even tell you if there's like any villain themes. You know? I couldn't pick it out if you asked me to.
Yep. Well, why don't we wrap things up here and talk about our ranking? Andy, do you want to go first on your rankings? Do you have them?
I think this is one of the easiest rankings to do. It goes right in order. 1, 2, 3. And between 1 and 2, there are just differences between them where I could say like there are certain aspects of 2 I like better than 1, vice versa. But if I'm just going to go with what I think works, there's one thing we didn't talk about, which is the science bit. I mentioned a little bit, but the nuclear fusion stuff, the whole river, Doc Ock's death, like it just didn't work for me with what else was going on. I think if they had done that maybe a little bit better, not in terms of the CGI, but like the story, how it was just kind of like thrown at us, I think I might have liked it more and maybe would have put it ahead of 1. 3 is awful. I looked up the box office. I can't believe this was the highest grossing out of them. Maybe that's just due to inflation between 2002 and 2007. But like, man, I do not like 3. That was a hate watch to get through it.
Yeah, I mean, mine would be the same order. I don't feel that bad about 3. It was definitely the worst of the bunch, and frankly, not a super just good movie in general. But yeah, I love. Like I said, 1 is the most nostalgic to me. It was like really exciting at the time, and I remember it the most. It strikes a great balance between silly comic book movie and exciting action adventure movie. It really does a good job at that. But I do like Doc Ock the best as the villain, and just all of the graphics that go along with Doc Ock, like the huge jump, from 1 to 2 in that aspect. But yeah, that would be my ranking: 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the first time we all universally agree 1, 2, 3. And similar thoughts. Overall, I think 1 is the strongest and hits all those tones of campiness, but grounded and real enough. 2, though, Alfred Molina almost takes it as far as like his performance. It almost takes it over 1. Like, that's how good he is. And that's like not to say Willem Dafoe is great too.
Yeah.
In 1, but like Alfred Molina, I think takes it to another level. Like I said before, he's a better caliber actor than these movies, and he still fit it really well. And then 3 is just a mess. There are a few redeeming qualities. I think some of the themes are redeeming, but the execution is lacking. The introduction of new characters is lacking. And I think the introduction of those characters, Andy, you were talking about the box office, I think more like it's probably the hype of, oh shit, Venom's going to be in this movie. That's awesome. And, maybe if some people like Sandman, but more than anything, I think it's like in the trailer, if you saw Venom, it's like, fuck yeah, they're going to end this on a high note. And then it's like, ooh, but right. That opening weekend drives a lot of that box office. And then it probably trails off really hard after that. Yeah, overall, I really like the series for the most part. 1 and 2 are really strong, and 3 is what it is. It's not a good end, but at least it is the end, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe. I think there are some things that like they could have set it up to continue on to keep making money off these things. I don't know what was happening with the studio and Marvel and how all that works with Sony and whatnot to determine. But I think this was probably one of my favorite trilogies because it's so self-contained. I think I've mentioned this before with other franchises, and I think that will be my metric going forward, is that the more self-contained it is and knows what it wants to be and ties in what came before it to what's coming forward, it all connects, it all fits in. That's a good franchise. I think it achieved what it wants to do as a franchise. Others are hit and misses, which we've talked about before. I think this was really good. I think it did what it wanted to do with these movies and executed it.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, this is just not only my favorite Spider-Man, and I think we're pretty tight on time, so maybe we'll skip that conversation for right now. But it's one of my favorite superhero series. I really enjoy it, and again, I might just be because I'm on a nostalgic kick, but really, really enjoyable. This was one of my favorite episodes to do with you guys.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Well, let's talk about what we're doing next time. So for the next episode, and luckily, because we're doing this live, we decided this beforehand. If you listen to the podcast in audio form, you get an edited version where we're like, oh shit, we didn't talk about what we're doing next time. We've got it together this time. So we decided on what I'm going to call the Shyamalaniverse. I like it. So it's going to be the Unbreakable series, I guess. So there's the movie Unbreakable with Bruce Willis. There's the movie Split, which seems like it's not connected, but then there's an end credit scene. And then the movie Glass, which kind of brings everything together. I've only seen Split. I'm excited to watch Unbreakable because I've heard great things about it. And I'm excited to see Glass to bring it all together.
Yeah, that one should be fun. I loved Split. I really liked Unbreakable too. That'll be fun to rewatch because I haven't seen that in so long. But I haven't seen Glass yet, so that'll be fun to kind of see how it wraps up. Should be a good conversation.
Any of these, and what I'm most excited for is I think what's cool about franchises, what we're doing is when movies are going to span longer periods of time in the real world, where you can like build upon things that have happened. They can fit more historical things that have occurred in real life. I don't know because I haven't seen these movies, but I'm thinking that there's going to be some really good conversations to talk about what they did in 2000 versus what they did in 2015 or whenever the Split came out.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting for sure. Well, we're going to wrap this up, but we're going to also be doing kind of an after show kind of deal here. So we're going to talk about some of the more fun aspects of stuff. Even though we still went long, we can't help ourselves, apparently, with just talking about this stuff, which is a good thing. We enjoy doing this, and it's a lot of fun. But we left some stuff, some like fan theory stuff, some just speculation, some funny stuff that you notice in these movies. We're going to save that for this next part. So when this comes out in audio form, it's going to be 2 separate episodes, and they're going to be released on separate weeks. But as far as watching it live, you get to see it all at once.
Well, here's my proposal to you guys. I know this is live, and I'm calling an audible, but it's 1:00 on a Sunday. So what do you guys say we postpone the after show to sometime this week? We can do a live stream sometime this week.
Wednesday?
Yeah, sure. Oh, right. That's your off day, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So let's plan on doing it Wednesday. Because I'm running out of steam, and I'm already going to be miserable tomorrow. So, so let's put a hold on our after show, if that's all right with you guys.
Yeah, that works for me. Just I guess going forward, that's what we're going to try to do, is what I laid out there. But this actually works. I didn't even realize it was 1:00. So. Let's get the fuck out of here. I gotta piss. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you for that one, and then Unbreakable.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Peace.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode,